Chapter 976. Phoebe's eyes lit up. He had been troubled by this matter for the past few days and had forgotten that there was a real oracle living in his palace. That was the oracle of the most powerful goddess in the legends, the goddess of nature. Just as she said, if the goddess of nature was willing to help, there was nothing that couldn't be solved. As for the condition Gu Xingyin mentioned, it was simple. The good thing about being the emperor was that he could get whatever he wanted done immediately. A notice was sent to all the citizens of the imperial city. It was an introduction to a goddess. The goddess of nature. Actually, many people knew about this goddess, probably because they had heard of her legends. But, wasn't she just a goddess from the legends? Why would they be sent such a thing? Many people curiously opened the small booklet and were immediately attracted by the beautiful illustrations and beautiful descriptions. In the booklet, there was a detailed record of the goddess of nature's position, domain, and some of her past deeds on this continent. Many people who saw it were shocked. These things were written so realistically, it was as if they had seen it with their own eyes. Moreover, some of the deeds in the booklet were indeed related to some famous events in history. This was something that the emperor ordered, and some of the more sensitive people had already noticed the emperor's intention. Could it be that the emperor suddenly had faith in the goddess of nature? Flipping to the back of the booklet, there was an order from the emperor. One day later, at St. Vita Square in the imperial city, everyone would witness a miracle. Miracle. Just these two words were enough to make countless people go crazy. Even those who didn't believe in the existence of gods would be intrigued by the word gods. Below, there was a requirement to go to St. Vita Square. That was, everyone had to pray to the goddess of nature tonight. Gu Xingyin didn't count how many people followed the instructions. She only felt an endless stream of faith flowing into her body. Her body was more stable, and her desolate temple was slowly repairing itself. She could already see the glory of the glorious era. The next day, since morning, there were people rushing to St. Vita Square. Most of the people successfully entered the square, but some of them were blocked outside by an invisible barrier. This was a formation set up by Gu Xingyin. Only believers who possessed the power of faith of the goddess of nature could enter. No matter how weak the power of faith was. As long as they had prayed according to the book last night, it was impossible for them to not be able to enter this place. Many people who had the mentality of taking a look saw this scene, and a trace of conviction appeared in their hearts. With such means, could it be that the gods had really appeared? At noon, St. Vita Square, which was large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people, was filled with people waiting for the miracle. Even in St. Vita City, such a grand occasion could only be seen once every few years. Noon, which was the time when the miracle would happen according to the booklet. Hubert was a merchant in St. Vitus. He never believed in the existence of gods. He just wanted to see what was going on. It's already noon. Where's the promised miracle? He heard someone complain beside him. I'm just here to watch the show. TSK. Who would really believe in miracles? That's right. Schubert looked up at the sky, and thought to himself, who would believe that? 10,000 chapters today, 4 more to go. Today, I will make up for the 3 chapters 10 on the 26th. I need a monthly vote. From today until the 7th, there will be double monthly votes. If you have a monthly vote, please come and vote for Gao Lingji. Chapter 977. There was a sudden gust of wind in the sky. The wind was very gentle, soft and warm as it blew on everyone's body. It made them feel as if the trace of irritation that had risen in their hearts while standing in this bustling crowd had disappeared without a trace. Then, the sky suddenly darkened. It was not that the sky was dark, but it was as if a layer of soft dye had been applied to the sky during the day, darkening it by a shade. There was a sudden commotion in the crowd. Schubert heard someone exclaim in surprise. Everyone seemed to be looking up at the sky. He looked up as well, and saw the most unbelievable scene in his life. Above the sky that was not dark, two things that everyone was very familiar with appeared, one on the left and the other on the right. A round sun hung high in the sky on the left, shining brightly. A crescent moon hung upside down in the sky on the right, spreading a soft radiance. The sun and moon hung high in the sky. It was a marvelous sight. And beneath the two enormous radiant objects, something even more marvelous appeared. As if separated from the human world, a faint white mist appeared beneath the sun and moon, making everything seem ethereal and untraceable. Then, as if a skyscraper had risen from the ground, a magnificent temple that did not exist in the human world slowly appeared before everyone's eyes. Everyone's eyes were drawn to the high throne in the middle of the temple. A figure wearing a green robe sat upon the throne. Her body was shrouded in a layer of soft holy light, and no one could see her face clearly. They could only see a little bit of golden hair that fell to the hem of her robe, as well as the majestic scepter she held in her right hand. "My believers, are you calling for me?" She spoke. Her voice was clear and gentle, with a faint pressure that rang in everyone's ears. The goddess of nature. A low cry of surprise could be heard. Some could not help but feel reverence from the bottom of their hearts, and knelt before the figure. If there was a first, there would be a second. One after another, the tens of thousands of people in the square knelt in the direction of the throne. The figure on the throne did not say anything. She just sat there quietly. Then, a green figure appeared in the temple. It was the oracle. Beside her was a beautiful nine-colored deer. Someone recognized her. It was the oracle of the goddess of nature who had been summoned into the palace by His Majesty. Everyone watched as the oracle walked into the divine throne. He lowered his head slightly as if he was listening to something. Many people pricked up their ears, wanting to hear God's voice again. Unfortunately, this time, they could not hear anything. Then, the oracle nodded and walked out of the goddess of nature's palace. The moment she walked out, the entire divine hall disappeared bit by bit as if it had just appeared. That place became empty space again, as if nothing had ever appeared. The sky also regained its bright color, and the spectacle of the sun and moon in the sky also disappeared. Only the oracle was left standing there alone. But this time, the entire St. Vita Square was silent, and it was no longer as restless and noisy as before. No one had forgotten the scene that had just subverted their imaginations. They all looked at the oracle silently, curious about what she had just heard. Gu Xingyin did not disappoint them. She opened her mouth and said a piece of exciting news. Chapter 978. The goddess of nature has just granted me the ability to temporarily control the wind and rain. This is the blessing she has bestowed upon the Roth Empire. Gu Xingyin's voice sounded in everyone's mind. She raised the scepter in her hand and chanted an obscure incantation. A gust of wind blew past her. The sky darkened at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was different from the previous situation. The sky was gray, the prelude to an impending storm. Then, everyone watched as the terrifying lightning bolts and dark clouds moved towards the northwest. They moved further and further away, landing in every affected area. Gu Xingyin looked around at everyone, her voice resounding, "The goddess of nature has never given up on any of her people. But now, the faith of the people on the continent has greatly disappointed her." Everyone looked at her in a daze. Everything that had happened today was simply too inconceivable. Someone had placed a fact in front of them, the gods that they had never believed in actually existed. This was simply a shock that overturned everything they knew. Gu Xingyin also knew that they needed some time to recover, so she just stood there quietly, waiting for them to come back to their senses. Louis Weiss's eyes burned as he looked at the woman standing in the most prominent position. Beautiful, powerful, and dazzling. The oracle of the goddess of nature, an existence that could listen to the teachings of the gods. Her image in his mind had never been so clear before. Suddenly, the sound of chanting came from somewhere. Louis Weiss listened carefully and found that it was a hymn praising the goddess of nature. It was like a tide. Slowly, some people began to hum along with that person. Gradually, more and more people began to hum. The scattered streams converged into a river. Then, countless surging rivers finally gathered together to form a power that could shake the heavens and earth. Everyone in the square began to sing the hymn of the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyin knew that her goal had been achieved. The barrier around St. Vita Square quietly disappeared. Many people who didn't go in were shocked by the song, which was loud enough to resound throughout the city. They all asked what was going on. Then, through the mouths of those who had personally experienced this, the name of the goddess of nature began to spread. Gu Xingyin wore a smile on her face as she quietly disappeared into the crowd. As soon as she appeared in her palace, she was informed that His Majesty had summoned her. This was to be expected. Gu Xingyin arrived at the emperor's palace. It was rare for the place to be so formal today, and there were no beautiful maids serving Phoebe. As soon as he saw Gu Xingyin, a warm smile appeared on his face. "Oracle, I saw the miracle in St. Vitus Square, and I just received news from the northwest." Phoebut looked at Gu Xingyin with shining eyes. "I wish to establish the faith of the goddess of nature in the Roth Empire. I would like to seek your opinion, Lord Oracle. That's a real god, you know." The moment he saw those miracles, there was only one thought in his mind: if such a powerful god was willing to protect the Roth Empire, if he was willing to protect the royal family, then the Roth Empire would be able to live on forever. This was the result that Gu Xingyin wanted. But, there was one more thing that needed to be explained. Chapter 979. Gu Xingyin looked straight at Phoebut. "If I'm not mistaken, the Roth Empire believes in the god of war." Phoebut's face showed a trace of awkwardness. Although their guardian was the god of war, none of the people had ever seen the god of war descend, and almost none of them still maintained their faith. He cleared his throat and said, "Our Roth Empire's guardian, according to the historical records, is the god of war. However, there are no records of the god of war blessing the Roth Empire. After seeing the goddess of nature descend, I doubt that the god of war even exists." Gu Xingyin thought, "He originally existed, but because your faith collapsed, his power was lost bit by bit, and in the end, he had no choice but to fall into an eternal slumber." Saying that there was no God's blessing, in the end, it was the result of humanity's own actions. Of course, Gu Xingyin couldn't say that out loud. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, and then finally nodded under Phoebut's expectant gaze. "The goddess of nature will not refuse any believer." Phoebut was overjoyed. "I'll immediately give the order to build goddess of nature temples throughout the Roth Empire." Gu Xingyin smiled, "Then I'll have to trouble your majesty." As the emperor, Phoebut's efficiency was undoubtedly very high. His order was quickly passed down. Every first-class city, with St. Vitus as an example, must have at least 2 temples of the goddess of nature. Every second and third-class city must have at least 1 temple of the goddess of nature. As for the rest of the smaller cities, a temple must be built between 2 neighboring cities. It wasn't just Emperor Phoebut, but the people's enthusiasm for the construction of temples was also unprecedentedly high. Among them, the people of St. Vitus and the northwestern region were the most enthusiastic. The former was because they had seen the goddess of nature descend with their own eyes, while the latter was because they had personally felt the gospel brought by the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyin only felt an endless stream of faith gathering in her body. According to this trend, it was only a matter of time before they returned to their heyday. She also officially moved out of the palace. Even though Emperor Phoebut repeatedly urged her to stay. This time, Emperor Phoebut didn't keep her because he had any improper thoughts, but because after seeing the strength of Gu Xingyin as an oracle, he felt that with such a strong person in the palace, his safety would be guaranteed. Even if he was given 100 guts, he wouldn't dare to lust for Gu Xingyin, who could directly communicate with the goddess of nature. In the end, Gu Xingyin decided to move out of the palace with the excuse that, since the temple has been completed, as an oracle, it is only natural for him to live in the temple. He moved to the goddess of nature's temple in St. Vitus Square. Because the goddess of nature, the goddess of nature descended at the Roth temple, and the goddess of nature, the goddess of God, the goddess of course, the goddess of God. Didn't, the god of the goddess of the god of God of the god. Because of the god of God, it s by the of God to God of God. It was a good idea to build a temple here, because it was big, the temple could take up a lot of space. On this day, she left little Nine in the temple, changed into a less eye-catching outfit, and went to the agreed place to meet someone. Royd and Louis Weiss were sitting there. Royd was in a bad mood, because when he heard that the oracle was coming, Louis Weiss found a lot of reasons to come along. Chapter 980. Although he knew that his subordinate and the oracle had no time to meet, it was impossible for them to be together without him knowing. But Royd was still a little unhappy. He had reminded Louis more than once not to get too close to Gu Xingyin. But he knew in his heart that if Louis could have a closer relationship with the oracle as his subordinate, the oracle would be more dedicated to the cooperation. But he just didn't want the two of them to be together. As long as he thought that one day, Louis Vis and that oracle would become lovers, his heart would be filled with boundless tyranny and irritation. He didn't even know why it was like this. I told you to wait. The door of the private room was pushed open, and a figure walked in. Louis's eyes lit up. In order to not be discovered, Gu Xingyin had changed her oracle outfit today. She was now wearing a very popular tight-fitting waistline dress. This design of the dress revealed her tall and perfect figure without a doubt. She wore a large lace hat of the same color on her head, which covered half of her face. She also held an exquisite pink folding fan in her hand. This style was the living embodiment of a noble lady. No one would associate her with the oracle in the temple who seemed to have a spring breeze halo. Louis went up and extended a hand. Welcome, Miss Bess. Thank you, Louis. Gu Xingyin closed her folding fan and smiled as she placed her hand in Louis's palm. Louis's eyes lit up with a hint of menace as he leaned over and planted a gentle kiss on the back of her hand. Royd suddenly coughed heavily, interrupting the joyous atmosphere between the two. Louis looked at the Duke, who was acting strangely in confusion. Royd's eyes secretly glanced at the back of Gu Xingyin's hand. He suddenly stood up and walked toward Gu Xingyin with a cold expression. Louis nervously stood in front of Gu Xingyin. He couldn't be blamed. Royd's eyes were too scary. Those who didn't know would think that he was going to fight with Gu Xingyin. Royd glanced at Louis indifferently. Move. Louis met those emotionless eyes. He clenched his fists and didn't move. Royd's voice dropped a notch. Louis, move. He had accumulated a lot of power among his subordinates. Louis met those dark blue eyes and his Adam's apple moved uneasily. In the end, he unwillingly took a step back. He still stared at Royd without blinking. He swore in his heart that if the Duke wanted to harm Miss Bess, he would not sit idly by. On the other hand, Gu Xingyin's expression didn't even change. She looked at Royd calmly, as if she wasn't worried about him. What happened next was out of their expectations. Lloyd strode to Gu Xingyin's side, and the corners of his mouth curled into a stiff smile. He extended his right hand toward Gu Xingyin. Welcome, Miss Bess. Louis was speechless. He was breaking down in his heart. It was just a welcome. Why did you have to look so fierce? Phew. Update 10. Finally, he finished writing the update before 12 o'clock. There was no update at midnight. There's still one more chapter left. Gigi will make it up as soon as possible. Good night, everyone. Also, I'd like to ask for monthly tickets, referral tickets, and tips. Chapter 981. Gu Xingyin looked much calmer than Louis Weisberg. She didn't seem to notice Royd's cold gaze as she smiled and winked. "Thank you, Your Excellency." Royd's frown deepened. She called him Louis Weiss, but she called him Duke. Did the difference in treatment have to be so obvious? He waited for her to extend her hand, but it was clear that Gu Xingyin didn't have any intention of doing so. Royd could only say impatiently, "Hand." Gu Xingyin was stunned. Seeing Royd's gaze on her left hand, she raised her hand in confusion. Then, Royd quickly grasped her hand and planted a kiss on the back of it. Gu Xingyin widened her eyes in shock. Louis looked at his superior in horror. Since when did His Excellency become so polite to a lady? After Royd finished, he quickly retracted his hand. Judging from his appearance, he seemed very unwilling to do what he had just done. "I didn't want to be rude," Royd said in his heart. "All right, Louis, we still have some things to discuss. You can leave first." Royd stood straight and mercilessly ordered his subordinate to leave. Louis was a bit reluctant, but he knew that there were some things he couldn't know. He glanced at Gu Xingyin and walked out with his head lowered. Gu Xingyin sat on a wide chair and quietly waited for Royd to speak. She thought that with this man's personality, he would definitely speak about serious matters. However, after a few minutes of silence, Royd spoke. "Your dress today is very beautiful." Gu Xingyin almost dropped the fan in her hand. She glanced at Royd in confusion and maintained a perfect smile. "Thank you for the compliment, Your Excellency." What was wrong with him? Grand Duke Royd wasn't a person who would exchange pleasantries. Looking at Gu Xingyin's strange and conflicted expression, Lloyd lowered his eyes. There was no joy on his face at all. Damned books. Didn't they say that a good conversation should start with a good topic? According to his knowledge, praising a woman's beauty or praising her beauty was undoubtedly the easiest way to gain their approval. But Royd was dismayed to find that this trick had no effect on the oracle of the goddess of nature. The other party was only puzzled for a moment before his expression returned to normal. It was as if he didn't hear him. Next time, he must have a good talk with the person who wrote this book about life. Gu Xingyin saw that the atmosphere between the two of them had become awkward again. She could only sigh and take the initiative to find a topic to talk about. "Your Grace, you sent a message asking to meet with me. Is there something you need?" she asked. Seeing that the other party had taken the initiative to talk about business, Royd breathed a sigh of relief. He said with a cold expression, "There are many goddess of nature temples in St. Vitus." The man's mellow voice resounded in the room. When he was talking about business, his handsome face was serious and could not be ignored. If a serious man was the most handsome, then this man was the most handsome at all times. Chapter 982. After Royd finished speaking, he stopped and looked at Gu Xingyin. Speaking of which, looking at the current situation, he felt that this oracle did not take advantage of him in any way. With her ability, she could clearly spread the faith of the goddess of nature by herself. However, it would be difficult for him to obtain that position without hurting the foundation. When he looked over, she was sitting on the chair with her hands crossed on her knees. Her posture was very elegant. Her eyes were focused on him. It was obvious that she had been listening to him very carefully. Royd was very satisfied with this. He appreciated this attitude. Of course, if he knew what this elegant oracle was thinking, he might not be so pleased. Gu Xingyin was talking to the system, "Don't you think he's very good looking?" The system answered very cautiously, "According to human aesthetics, this duke is a very rare handsome man." Gu Xingyin smiled and nodded, "I think so too." When he turned around, she had stopped talking and was obviously asking for his opinion. The contents of the conversation flashed through her mind. Gu Xingyin maintained her perfect smile and nodded, "There are no problems, Your Grace." I hope our cooperation can continue. Royd looked at Gu Xingyin carefully and confirmed that she was not unwilling at all. He felt a little relieved, but he could not help but ask. Forgive me for being blunt, Miss Beezy. With your ability and the power of the goddess of nature, it is not difficult to spread the faith of the goddess of nature across the entire continent. Why would you choose to continue working with me? Royd was certain that with such an oracle, no faction would refuse to work with her. Gu Xingyin was not surprised to hear this question. She smiled and looked at Royd. After my reputation spread, there were many people who were willing to work with me. However, when I was unknown, there were not many who had the courage to believe in me and work with me, Your Grace. What's more, she smiled, I can see that although His Excellency the Duke has no faith, he is an upright and sincere person. Working with someone like you, I don't have to worry about bad things happening in the future, right? From Royd's point of view, he saw her gently looking at him. Her delicate face walked into his eyes for the first time so straightforwardly and powerfully. His pupils shrank slightly, but they soon returned to normal. Thank you for your answer. Gu Xingyin smiled and stood up. It's no trouble. Your Grace, if you have any questions or plans in the future, you can contact me at any time. Royd saw that she wanted to leave, so he got up and walked in front of her to open the door. Louis, who had been waiting outside, saw Gu Xingyin, and his eyes lit up. Master Beezy, have you finished your discussion with the Duke? Do you have any plans for the next few days? Can I invite you to have lunch with me? I know a restaurant in the city. She doesn't have time. Royd coldly cut him off. Under Louis's confused and gloomy gaze, Royd turned his head and looked at Gu Xingyin with shining eyes. Lady Beezy, please. Chapter 983. Gu Xingyin looked at Royd in surprise. She didn't understand when she had an appointment with him. However, this wasn't the right time to embarrass him. Gu Xingyin smiled and followed Royd's direction into the carriage. Royd didn't leave. He stood there and watched Gu Xingyin look at the carriage before turning to Louisville, who didn't know what was going on. Louis, he called out his subordinate's nickname. I know how you feel about her, but I'm warning you for the last time. Don't get involved with her. Royd's tone was very serious. Louisville didn't listen this time. Instead, he looked at his superior and asked, Why, Your Grace? I feel that Miss Bess is a very outstanding and beautiful woman. I have the freedom to pursue her. Why? Royd repeated these 3 words and suddenly smiled. Then I'll tell you. Royd looked at his subordinate and said word by word, because she will be mine. After he finished speaking, he no longer paid any attention to his dumbstruck subordinate and strode towards the carriage. Because there was a lady in the carriage, Royd didn't get in out of respect. Instead, he rode his horse and followed beside the carriage. Under his command, the carriage slowly moved in a certain direction. A cool breeze brushed past his face and woke Royd up. He didn't expect that he would say that in front of his subordinates. In fact, he had never thought that he would have such feelings for the oracle. He didn't even think about it before they met today. Perhaps it was the moment she said she could trust him that something buried in his heart quietly sprouted. Royd was never someone who would run away from reality. Since he had such thoughts, he wasn't going to hide it from her or test her. Instead, he was going to tell her openly. What if she didn't like him? Royd refused to accept this possibility. Anyway, as long as he was around, no other man would appear by her side. Your Grace. A gentle voice came from the carriage. Can you explain to me where you're taking me? Royd could roughly guess the expression of the person in the carriage. She would probably frown slightly. She would at most show a hint of helplessness after such a rude thing was done to her. She would not be angry, let alone lose her poise because of it. Lunch, Royd replied. Gu Xingyin, when did she agree to have lunch with him? She said, Your Excellency, I didn't promise you, Royd's voice came through the thick curtains. I have something important to tell you. All right then. Gu Xingyin shut her mouth. If there was something, she wouldn't say much. But why didn't he tell her everything in one go in that room just now? The carriage stopped at a place. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and a hand reached out. Gu Xingyin was startled. She put her hand on the hand and used his strength to get off the carriage. Thank you, Your Excellency. She leaned to the side and thanked him. Royd felt the residual warmth in his hand and felt a bit regretful that she took it back so quickly. You're welcome. Chapter 1000. Gao Lingji's first 1000 chapters novel was a very memorable number. Chapter 984. What's this? Gu Xingyin looked at his surroundings in surprise. She thought that the food he was talking about would be in one of the more famous restaurants in St. Vitus City. But this place, no matter how she looked at it, looked like an ordinary house. Royd walked straight ahead and gestured for Gu Xingyin to follow him. This is one of my courtyards. The servants who had received the news had already opened the door and tidied everything up, waiting for their master to arrive. As they walked, Royd introduced the place to Gu Xingyin. I have a chef who has been here for more than 20 years. His skills are comparable to those of the royal chefs in the palace. As Gu Xingyin listened to him, she was secretly surprised. Based on her understanding of Royd, he wasn't a talkative person. But now, he seemed to have unlimited enthusiasm and was trying his best to find a topic to talk about. It was rare for the master to come, but this courtyard, which had been quiet all year round, seemed to be filled with life again. The two sat in the pavilion with exquisite snacks and drinks in front of them. Oh right, Your Grace, the important matter you mentioned. Gu Xingyin didn't forget that he had brought her here. That. Royd's lips twitched as he looked at Gu Xingyin with an inexplicable expression. Gu Xingyin felt that there was something wrong with his gaze. She hurriedly communicated with the system. System, there hasn't been anything that's disadvantageous to me recently, right? The system's answer was very certain. No, host. That's good. Gu Xingyin relaxed and looked at Royd calmly. Then, she heard the man's thin lips slightly open as he said, I realize that I like you, BZ. Are you willing to rule the Rotter Empire with me after I achieve my goal? Gu Xingyin's first reaction was that something was wrong. She couldn't be blamed for feeling strange. After all this time, she had never felt any affection from Royd. She had once thought that this man did not have any romantic feelings in his heart. How could she have known that this confession would come so unexpectedly? So much so that her calm face cracked for a moment. Royd was very happy to see this. He always thought that Bai Si was used to being an oracle and always maintained a compassionate and gentle expression. That kind of expression, compared to a person, was more like a deity without any worries or emotions. He was very happy to see her surprised expression. This way, she would be closer to a human. Gu Xingyin came back to her senses and met Lloyd's burning gaze. He looked at her without blinking. It seemed that he was determined to get an accurate answer from her. Actually, Royd wasn't as strong as he appeared to be. He had never liked anyone before, so he didn't know what kind of development was right. He had already made sure that no one of the opposite sex was around her, so that he was the only one in her line of sight. However, he couldn't guarantee that she would fall in love with him. Gu Xingyin was stunned for a few seconds. Suddenly, a completely different and human smile appeared on her face. It was a smile that Royd liked very much. What a coincidence. I happen to like the Duke very much too, she said slowly. Today, after washing my hair, I had a migraine attack and couldn't write anymore. In one night, I barely wrote 4,000 chapters. I'm really sorry. Including the one I owed previously, I owed a total of 5 chapters. Gigi promised to make up for it in the future. I'm sorry to ask for your votes today. Wu%_% good night, everyone. Chapter 985. Such a straightforward admission stunned Royd. Of course, his face, which only had one expression all year round, was stunned. But the shock in his heart was indescribable. When he said that sentence, he was prepared to receive any response. Moreover, in his heart, he believed that the possibility of rejection was quite high. Lloyd knew himself well. He knew that the most attractive aspects of him to women were none other than his noble status, great wealth, and handsome looks. In the eyes of this oracle, these three things were not enough to attract her. Then, personality. Royd shook his head inwardly. He knew himself very well. With his personality, he was definitely not the type to be liked. Gu Xingyin looked at the tense and expressionless face in front of her, as if he was thinking. But she knew that at this moment, this man was probably just in a daze. She used the fan to cover half of her face and called out, "Your Excellency the Duke." Royd quickly came back to his senses. "Call me Royd." Gu Xingyin blinked and went along with his wishes. Royd. Sure enough, it sounded much better than Your Excellency the Duke. Royd thought to himself silently. In an instant, Royd came back to his senses. He looked at the smiling woman in front of him and suddenly stood up. "Wait here for a moment." Then he turned around and strode away. What kind of development was this? At this time, as the man who confessed first, shouldn't he say some sweet words to coax her? Gu Xingyin put down the fan in her hand and took a sip of the tea on the table. "System, what do you think he's doing?" The servants in this courtyard did not dare to approach her, so she could only talk to the system. The system indicated that it did not want to answer this kind of question. But it didn't seem good to leave the host hanging. Moreover, what if in the future, thinking of a possibility that was almost the truth, the system felt that its attitude could be better to the person in front of it? Host, the system feels that, according to human logic, it will be a pleasant surprise, the system replied. Gu Xingyin was actually just bored and chatted with the system. As the system had been single for 10,000 years, Gu Xingyin did not think that it would be able to give any constructive suggestions. Forever single system, Gu Xingyin asked, "How is he doing?" When it came to work, the system's actions were much smoother. A long string of information quickly entered Gu Xingyin's mind. It was He's recent experience, and it was very detailed. Just as Gu Xingyin had expected, without the powerful goddess of nature, He's days were not very good. She was still the oracle of the water god who had long fallen into a deep slumber. An oracle without the protection of a god could be seen by referring to the current situation of the Kapuna family where Louis was from. Needless to say, the entire Roth Empire was now slowly gathering the faith of the goddess of nature. This was also imperceptibly weakening the influence of the remaining gods. Naturally, He's days were even more difficult. Being forced to live had already consumed all of her energy. Not to mention that her ambition was growing day by day like in the original plot, and she even wanted to replace the position of the goddess of nature. All He wanted now was to be able to live a comfortable life like before. In a different position, the things one wanted would be completely different. This was indeed the case. Chapter 986. Gu Xingyin was letting her imagination run wild when Royd returned. She noticed that Royd seemed to be holding something in his hand. He walked to the table and sat down. Then he pushed the thing in his hand toward Gu Xingyin. It was a small box with a very delicate shape. It seemed to be made of gold and was inlaid with many large gems. Rather than a container, it was more like an exquisite piece of art. Royd looked at Gu Xingyin with an urging gaze. He seemed to want her to open it immediately. Gu Xingyin was a little curious. What could be stored in such an exquisite little box? She put down the folding fan in her hand and put her hand on the latch. With a click, the box's latch was opened. Gu Xingyin thought that it might be an exquisite piece of art, precious gems, or beautiful jewelry. However, it wasn't. Inside this small box was a whole box of neatly arranged badges of honor. These badges made of gold shone brightly in the sun. This is... Gu Xingyin looked at Royd in surprise. Royd just looked at her quietly and said, "There's another layer below." He just wanted her to continue looking. Gu Xingyin reached out and touched it. Sure enough, she found a small mechanism in the box's interlayer. Taking out the box full of badges, there were many pieces of white paper lying quietly under it, and even some pieces of yellow paper. She glanced at Royd. He was looking at her without blinking. "Open it and take a look." Gu Xingyin took out 2 pieces of paper and opened them in front of him. Gu Xingyin looked at Royd in surprise. One of the 2 pieces of paper was the title deed of a castle and the other was the title deed of a manor. There was a thick layer of paper below. It wasn't hard to guess what was inside. Gu Xingyin put down the paper in her hand. She looked at Royd and asked, "This is?" Royd didn't look at the box. His attention was on Gu Xingyin. "I've read in a book that if you like someone, you have to share your most precious things and all your wealth with them," Royd said. Royd said, "The badge on top is my honor and something I'm willing to protect with my life. Below is all the wealth I have. Now, I'm willing to give it all to you." Even Gu Xingyin couldn't help but be moved when she heard such straightforward and passionate words. This man didn't say any sweet nothings to her, but what he did was more touching than any sweet nothings in the world. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but laugh. "But Royd, we haven't reached that stage yet. You have to give these things to your future wife." Royd frowned. "You and I have already connected our hearts. Don't you plan to marry me in the future? If you want to hold a wedding immediately, it's indeed inconvenient. After all, my current identity is sensitive. Being with me will have a bad impact on you." He frowned as if seriously considering the feasibility of this matter. Gu Xingyin looked at him and finally couldn't help but laugh. She reached out and covered his hand. "No, I won't marry anyone else. I swear to the goddess of nature that my husband will only be you." Chapter 987. Royd's face was stiff as he held Gu Xingyin's hand in his. If one took a closer look, one could see that his ears were slightly red. He said in a low voice, "Shouldn't the man say it first?" Gu Xingyin didn't give him face this time and laughed out loud. By the time the 2 of them had finished their heart-to-heart talk, a sumptuous lunch was already prepared. After the 2 finished their lunch, they enjoyed the scenery for a while before Royd sent her back to the temple in St. Vitus Square. "Goodbye, Royd." Gu Xingyin turned around and said to him. This was the back of the temple, where Gu Xingyin usually lived and no outsiders could come in. Lloyd suddenly strode toward her, leaned over, and kissed her on the cheek. His actions were done in one smooth motion. "The book says that couples can have some intimate interactions when they say goodbye," he said with a straight face. Gu Xingyin looked at his red ears, held back her laughter, and copied him. She tiptoed and kissed him on his left cheek. Royd turned around and left, satisfied. When he returned to his duke's mansion, the butler reported that Count Louis had been waiting for a long time. Lloyd had long expected that Louis Vis would come. He took the horsewhip in his hand and threw it to the butler, then went straight to the study. "Your Grace." Louise greeted him as soon as she saw him, but she didn't know what to say after greeting him. Ever since the 2 of them left in the morning, he had been in a daze. How could the Duke say something like that? He thought for a long time and finally decided to come to the Duke's mansion to ask. But the butler told him that the Duke wasn't there. He waited for a few hours. He had a lot of questions to ask. What did the Duke mean by what he said earlier? Did he really have a relationship with Miss Bess? Even if they were out for so long, were they dating? But when he saw Royd, he found that he couldn't ask at all. Royd sat calmly in his seat and looked at his subordinate's conflicted expression. He didn't feel guilty at all. If he was not mistaken, Louis had liked Bai Si for a long time. But all his time was spent on hesitation and cautiously approaching. When it came to such matters, once he had made up his mind, he should act decisively, regardless of the outcome. If the other party also liked him, it would naturally be a happy ending. If the other party had no feelings for him, Grand Duke Royd said that he would try his best to make the other party like him. That was how domineering they were. If you drag things out and end up with nothing in the end, who can you blame? He waited for a while to make sure that his subordinate still had no intention of speaking. Louis. He called out his subordinate's nickname in a deep voice. The two of them were about the same age and had grown up together. The Kapuna family had always been his loyal followers. Although the two of them were superior and subordinate, they were more like brothers most of the time. Of course, if Royd was referring to his brother, King Phoebe, then his relationship with Louis Weiss was much better than that of blood brothers. Louise stood up straight out of reflex and looked at Royd. "What do you want to ask me?" Louis's heart trembled, and his gaze finally became firm. Chapter 988. What's your relationship with Lady Bai Si? Louis asked. Royd nodded. As you thought, we're together. Louis's gaze trembled, and he felt his heart empty for a moment. He forced a smile. Is that so? Then I wish you, having just found out that his sweetheart was someone else's lover, one could imagine the dejection in Louis's heart. He still couldn't say the words of blessing out loud. But Royd didn't care about this. He looked at his good brother and spoke without a trace of euphemism. I'm well aware of your feelings for her. I don't care about how it was in the past, but from today onwards, Louis, you have to put away these thoughts and suppress them. You have to remember, she's mine. Louis forced a smile. Of course I know that. He still had a bit of moral integrity, but he still felt some regret in his heart. It was the first time in his life that he was moved by a woman, but he couldn't even confess. Royd trusted his brother's character, and telling him was just a declaration of male sovereignty. After settling his private matters, Royd began to put his thoughts on business. His actions were already not slow, but now there was another motivation to push him forward. He wanted to make himself and Bai Si official as soon as possible. With his current situation, if he married Bai Si, Phoebe would definitely start to doubt and even reject Bai Si. The current faith in the goddess of nature had not yet fully grown, and if Phoebe was determined to resist the divine right, it would definitely cause a storm, and Bai Si's previous efforts would basically be in vain. Gu Xingyin roughly understood her thoughts, and the various activities in the temple began to become more frequent, and there was even another god's descent. Sure enough, Phoebe began to firmly believe in the goddess of nature, and there were more and more believers in the Roth Empire. There were even many people who spontaneously went to the temple to pray regularly and requested to hold a ceremony for the goddess of nature. The so-called ceremony was a large-scale event. On the day of the god's birthday, prayers would be held, and believers would offer their loyal faith and carefully prepared gifts for the god. Phoebe hesitated for a moment. He had already begun to realize that the development of the divine right seemed to be somewhat out of control. When he accepted the faith of the goddess of nature, his initial purpose was to make it serve the royal authority. But now, the goddess of nature was showing signs of surpassing the royal authority. This kind of thing was intolerable to anyone in power. However, how could Gu Xingyin let him disagree? The holy water bestowed by the goddess of nature allowed Phoebe's weak body to regain its strength. It also made his faith in the goddess go up a notch. With a wave of his hand, Phoebe passed the case. Gu Xingyin looked at all of this with a smile, feeling the power of faith from the Roth Empire surround her. Her temple had now regained its glory. The ceremony of the goddess of nature had passed this year and was scheduled for next year. There were still 8 months left. With the protection of the goddess of nature, Phoebe became more and more arrogant and unscrupulous in his actions. He kidnapped women, increased taxes, and wasted money to build a temporary palace. The people of the Roth Empire were becoming more and more dissatisfied with the royal family. Gu Xingyin coldly watched Phoebe continue to court disaster. See you tonight. Chapter 989. Clang. Phoebe fiercely threw the thing in his hand to the ground. A group of lowly fellows, actually vainly trying to resist the powerful bear of dynasty. Phoebe fiercely gulped down a mouthful of tea, his eyes bloodshot. This was the third uprising that had occurred in the past month. The first two were caused by ordinary citizens, but this time, it was caused by the lord of a manor with a noble title. Although each movement was suppressed by the Empire's army, Phoebe understood that he no longer had the will of the people. Where's the oracle? Quickly. Quickly ask her to come. At this time, the only person he could think of to help him was Gu Xingyin. Currently, the people of the Roth Empire were very worshipful of the goddess of nature. If the oracle was willing to stand by his side and say that the bear of dynasty's ruling position was recognized by the gods, he was confident that he could make the people settle down. Gu Xingyin came quickly. Oracle, quickly go and pray to the goddess of nature. Have her issue an oracle to make those lowly commoners work properly and not think about those useless things. Phoebe said. Gu Xingyin looked at him with a strange gaze. Your Majesty, do you still remember what I told you? Don't be too harsh on your people. Use the money you spent on the palace to level the roads in remote areas. Phoebe irritably interrupted her. I don't want to hear this. How could I be threatened by those lowly commoners? Oracle, you only need to do as I say. Gu Xingyin's expression didn't change. Then I will try to communicate with the gods. She walked out of the palace and saw a maid carrying tea walking towards the main hall with a nervous expression. Nowadays, no matter who it was, when they went to see His Majesty, they all kept quiet out of fear that when they went in to serve him, His Majesty would be in a bad mood. A punishment was already a light punishment. If it was serious, they might even lose their lives. Gu Xingyin sighed inwardly and continued to walk forward. On the way, the guards saw her and saluted her. The faces of these people were all numb. The imperial palace, the dynasty, had already begun to rot from the inside. In contrast to the imperial capital, in the distant northwestern region of the empire, the people there lived a rich and leisurely life. Their family's warehouse was filled with food, and they wore thick clothes in the winter. The elderly and children all had happy smiles on their faces. That was the territory of Grand Duke Royd. Gu Xingyin slowly closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, the scene in front of her had changed. The imperial city was no longer what it looked like on a normal day. The originally empty sky was now filled with colorful spots of light. The light spots were of different colors and represented different emotions. Green represented comfort, yellow represented fear, gray represented despair, and red represented anger. These were the emotions of the believers of the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyin only needed to feel them slightly to be able to clearly hear their inner thoughts. But it was very clear that in the sky, the proportion of green light spots was getting smaller and smaller, and the proportion of yellow and gray was gradually increasing. Fibbit's rule made these people unable to see a trace of hope. Wait a little longer. Gu Xingyin said softly in her heart, soon, there will be a person who will lead his army to rescue you from this mire of despair. Chapter 990. Time passed by quickly. When the harvest season of the second year arrived, the people of the Roth Empire welcomed the goddess of nature's festival. Gu Xingyin made ample preparations for this. Emperor Phoebe had also made sufficient preparations. He still hoped that this ceremony would be able to calm the restless people down. As the most famous oracle of the goddess of nature, Gu Xingyin stayed at the goddess of nature's temple in St. Vitus city. As for the festivals in other places, they were also handled by different oracles. Gu Xingyin had already discussed with Roy that they would bring a big gift to Phoebe and the entire Roth Empire. On this day, Gu Xingyin was dressed very formally. Phoebe also led the royal family to the goddess of nature's temple in formal attire to show their respect. The huge square of the temple was already densely packed with believers. Among these believers, some were nobles in bright clothes. They wore exquisite clothes, and the ladies even sprinkled perfume, competing with each other to the side. Most of them were ordinary people. The only thing they could do was to wear clean and tidy clothes, so as not to tarnish the goddess of nature's festival. Gu Xingyin even saw homeless people on the streets who only had one set of clothes. In the cold wind of late autumn, they took off their clothes and carefully washed them, smoothed them out, and hung them out in the sun. At night, they slept in a pile of hay, shivering. Many of the believers put their treasures into a huge container in the middle of the square. This container was used to store the gifts that the believers gave to the goddess of nature. It was a huge transparent glass container, and when things were put inside, they could be seen clearly. Some nobles put their favorite jewelry inside, some merchants put a bag of gold coins inside, some young girls put their favorite flowers inside, and some children gave their favorite toys to the goddess. They looked like they were about to cry, because their mothers told them that they must give their most precious things to the goddess. There were even farmers in simple clothes who put a small bag of food. For them, food that could keep them from starving was the most precious thing in the world. Gu Xingyin kept a smile on her face as she watched all this, until the clock tower's bell rang, signaling the start of the festival. At this moment, everyone in the square saw a green light sprinkle down from the sky, falling on everyone's body. Being enveloped by this green light, everyone felt their body and mind relax. Then, the glass container that carried the good wishes of the believers suddenly became empty. The gifts that were given to the gods also disappeared at the same time as the green light disappeared. The goddess of nature has received your gifts. Gu Xingyin said to her believers with a smile. Immediately, a burst of loud cheers erupted from the square. Phoebe was a little dejected. He had just relied on his status and was unwilling to put the gifts into the container with the commoners. This way, the goddess didn't see his gifts at all. Then, Gu Xingyin began to stand alone on the high altar, chanting hymns. All the believers maintained a pious posture. According to the records, after this ceremony, if the goddess was satisfied with this festival, she might personally descend. The goddess's descent. This was the dream of all the believers. There were more at night. Today, there were more chapters. Tonight, they would shamelessly ask for a wave of monthly votes. Chapter 991. An ancient and mysterious hymn sounded from the altar. The believers looked at the indistinct green-robed figure on the altar with pious eyes. In the eyes of the believers, who could not possibly come into contact with God, the oracle was the closest person to God. The hymn ended. The entire square fell into silence. Everyone held their breaths, waiting for a miracle to happen. Gu Xingyin lowered his head slightly and glanced at the crowd below. The tens of thousands of people all did the same thing, they crossed their hands in front of their foreheads, hoping that the God they believed in would look after them. She smiled, and then, her figure suddenly changed. In everyone's eyes, even those who couldn't see clearly with their eyes, they could clearly see the figure on the altar that was very far away from them. Her golden hair quickly grew and soon reached her ankles. The green robe on her body changed, and the green leaf embroidery on the robe sparkled. Her eyes became emerald green, and an indescribable gorgeous crown appeared on her forehead. In her hand, she held a golden scepter. Her face was beautiful and exquisite, but it could not stay in anyone's mind for even a second. Gu Xingyin's green eyes, which seemed to contain everything in the world, slowly swept through the crowd below. Being stared at by such a gaze, everyone had an impulse to prostrate themselves in worship. Greetings, my believers. A voice as cool as water slowly brushed past everyone's eardrums. God. Like a tide, everyone knelt down with fanatical expressions. The gods had actually heard their calls and had descended upon them. At this moment, no one doubted that the person standing on the altar was a god. With such dignity, with such a gaze, how could she not be a god? Even Phoebe could not resist following her instincts and unwillingly knelt down in front of Gu Xingyin. Then, she felt the gaze of the gods fall on her. Phoebe did not dare to look up. She was a bit excited, and did not know what God wanted to say to her. She felt that she could immediately declare that next year, no, starting tomorrow, she would build more goddess of nature temples in the Roth Empire and continue to pass down the faith of the goddess. The goddess of nature spoke, "Ruler of the Roth Empire, why do you not treat your people well?" What? Phoebe was stunned. The goddess of nature continued, "Every day, I see the poor without clothes on their bodies, hear the cries of babies, and wanderers begging for a place to stay. Ruler of the Roth Empire, you are making your people suffer." Phoebe only felt a huge divine power descending on her body. Her face became pale, and she could fall to the ground at any time. But she still insisted, "They are just a few lowly commoners, God, how can you doubt me because of them?" Lowly commoners. The voice of the goddess of nature resounded throughout the Roth Empire, "In my eyes, there is no such thing as wealth or poverty. Those who believe in me are my people." Many people had tears in their eyes because of this sentence. Yes, they were not lower than anyone else. At least in the eyes of the gods, they were not inferior to anyone else. Phoebe felt a chill all over her body. Then, he heard God's indifferent voice, "Phoebe is unworthy of being the emperor of the Roth Empire." Seeing the chapter number of 1008, she had the urge to write 10,086. Chapter 992. The moment Fibbit heard this, other than anger, his heart surged with even more ridicule. Did she really think that she could decide everything just because she was a god? Whether or not he could become the emperor of the Roth Empire was decided by a single word from her. But when he raised his head and looked around, his heart went cold. The commoners that he had always looked down upon were now looking at him with hatred and hatred. The nobles who had received countless rewards from him were also looking at him with strange gazes. It was as if he was a person who had been reprimanded by the gods, and if they got too close to him, it would be a sin. He turned around in a daze and found that even his personal guards had silently distanced themselves from him. A single word from the gods had caused him to be deserted. Was this the power of faith? He thought bitterly, could it be considered that he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own foot? Gu Xingyin didn't say anything else. As a god, she only needed to express her attitude. Her long hair returned to its original appearance, and the scepter and crown disappeared at the same time. In an instant, Gu Xingyin returned to the appearance everyone was familiar with. Everyone knew that the gods had left. Next, the oracle would choose the lucky ones to bless, and this ceremony could be considered to have been completed successfully. As soon as the gods left, Fibbit stood up in a flustered and exasperated manner. "Men!" He looked around and shouted angrily. Pointing at the altar and the shrine, Zhang Xian said, "Tear these things down. Don't mislead others with your lies. Slander this emperor." He was so angry that he stomped his feet, but the guards behind him all looked at each other, and no one dared to move. What a joke, how could they dare to tear down the place where the gods had just ascended? Not to mention, most of the guards were believers of the goddess of nature. Gu Xingyin's words just now had already caused Fibbit, the emperor's authority in their hearts to drop to a freezing point. But Fibbit still wanted to court death. The goddess of nature had just finished her descent, and when the believers were at their most emotional, he clamored to tear down the temple. Didn't he see that the believers had already spontaneously blocked in front of the temple? Fibbit's heart was ruthless as he said sternly, "Can't you hear my orders? Tear it down. Whoever dares to stop you will be killed without mercy." There were still a few trusted subordinates of the emperor who didn't have any faith who stepped forward. Seeing the rest of the civilians using their own bodies to shield themselves, their eyes flashed with cruelty as they raised the swords in their hands high. Fear flashed across the faces of the commoners, but their bodies did not move. This was the place of the gods, and they could not be allowed to destroy it. Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat when she saw this. Did he really think that she was dead? Just as the soldier's sword was about to fall, a bolt of lightning suddenly descended from the sky and struck straight at him. Not even his bones remained. Gu Xingyin used this move to intimidate them. She had also used her blood to prove that the goddess of nature was not without a temper. It's a divine punishment. The gods will not abandon us. The believers all knelt down in excitement at this scene, murmuring praises to the goddess of nature. Phoebe returned to the palace with an ashen face. However, things weren't over yet. Phoebe, who had just returned to the palace, received the news. Grand Duke Royd had rebelled. Chapter 993. Fibbit ordered the Empire's army to fight. The result could be imagined. One side had been preparing for a long time, and the other side had been fighting in a hurry. One side's morale was strong, and the other side had just been abandoned by the gods. The Empire's army was retreating in defeat. What was even more infuriating was that the people of the Empire were not angry at the rebels at all when they heard the news. They maintained a rare silence, and they were even happy to see such a situation. After all, the current emperor was someone who had been reprimanded by the gods themselves. At the beginning, Phoebe was still furious, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. But now, he had begun to feel powerless and afraid. His brother's army was coming over aggressively. His army was retreating in defeat, and they were about to reach the imperial city. At that time, he would have no way out. "Duke, there's a messenger from the imperial city." Royd was sitting in the camp in his military uniform. He gestured for his subordinates to bring the person up. The messenger's legs were a little weak in the face of the murderous soldiers. He took out the letter in his hand in trepidation. It was Fibbit's handwritten letter. The letter described the sincere feelings between the two brothers very sincerely. He was very sad about Royd's actions. He also said that as long as Royd was willing to turn back and admit his mistakes, he would definitely let bygones be bygones and was willing to rule the empire with him. Royd read it expressionlessly and threw it to his confidant. "My brother, the emperor, is still putting on the airs of an emperor." Louis read it at a glance and was a little speechless in his heart. His Majesty's brain didn't seem to be very clear. At this time, he still couldn't recognize the situation. Let bygones be bygones. Did he really think that the initiative was still in his hands? Royd looked at the messenger coldly. "Go back and tell His Majesty Emperor Fibbit that Royd thanks him for his good intentions. We'll meet in the imperial city." This was a clear rejection. The messenger wiped the sweat on his forehead and went out. The aura of this duke was too strong. He looked at him coldly, and he really thought that the other party would behead him in the next moment. Fortunately, he managed to keep his life. But the duke's reply, the messenger thought about His Majesty's temper and deeply felt that if he replied like this, he was afraid that he would lose his little life that he had painstakingly saved. He pondered for a moment. Since his wife and children were in his hometown, why not take advantage of this opportunity to escape and return home to avoid trouble? With that thought in mind, the horsewhip in his hand subconsciously changed direction, and the horse galloped in the opposite direction of the imperial city. In the palace, Phoebe did not receive a reply. He would never have thought that it was his messenger who ran away because he was afraid of angering him. He would think that Royd didn't accept his suggestion and killed the messenger. Damn it! Damn it! Refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. I've already taken a step back, yet he's still not satisfied. Phoebe paced back and forth in the palace. He was annoyed, and another set of new tea sets on the table was scrapped. The maids lowered their heads and kept quiet out of fear. They were afraid that His Majesty's anger would spread to them if he was unhappy. Fortunately, Phoebe was not in the mood to find trouble with these maids. He watched as time passed day by day. When Royd's army finally arrived outside the imperial city, Phoebe could no longer sit still. Chapter 994. Royd received a letter from his elder brother. This time, the emperor, who thought highly of himself, finally put down his pride and spoke with a pleading tone. But Royd didn't want to talk to him anymore. 2 days later, Phoebe sat in the palace. Beside him were his only trusted subordinates. His wife and children were killed by him, and most of the maids in the palace had run away. In his current situation, he could be considered a loner. "Royd, my brother." When he saw Royd, he actually wasn't as hysterical and angry as he had imagined. This made Royd raise his eyebrows. It seems that his brother wasn't completely useless, at least he could still maintain his composure in this situation. Phoebe silently stared at him for a while, then suddenly smiled strangely. "Royd, you must be very proud of yourself right now, right?" he said. Royd didn't say anything. Phoebe didn't want an answer either. He just continued, "I'm telling you, Royd, don't be proud. I didn't lose to you, and don't think you have everything under control. If it wasn't for the goddess of nature's words that made my people stop supporting me, do you think you could have easily conquered the palace? So what if you've taken the throne? This is no longer the era of imperial power. As long as that high and mighty God says a word, you can be like me, falling from your high and mighty position into the dust." He laughed in schadenfreude, his eyes flashing as if he could already see Lloyd's miserable future like his. Royd didn't answer his question. Seeing that Royd didn't care, Phoebe just smiled. Blood flowed out from his mouth. He laughed loudly and sat on the high throne, losing his breath. "Duke?" A subordinate who came with Royd carefully asked him what to do. Royd looked away and said, "Clean it up and give it a proper burial." While everyone was cheering and organizing the spoils of war, Royd came to St. Vitus Square alone. The goddess of nature's temple here was the largest temple in the entire Roth Empire. He walked through countless devout believers and went straight to the back. There was someone waiting for him. "You're here." Gu Xingyin stood in the garden and turned around when she heard the noise. She didn't seem surprised at all to see him and smiled. Seeing her, Royd felt his chaotic thoughts calm down at once. A power that came from the bottom of his heart urged him to quicken his steps and walk to the woman's side. Then, under her surprised gaze, he hugged her. He sighed in satisfaction, his heart completely calmed down. Gu Xingyin turned her head and looked at the man who rarely showed such weak emotions. She didn't say anything and quietly waited for him to recover himself. After a long while, Royd released her and looked at Gu Xingyin. "Now that Phoebe is dead, this empire belongs to you and me," he said. "Bais, do you want this empire?" he asked. Gu Xingyin suddenly raised her head to look at the man. Lloyd looked at her openly, not holding back a single shred of his emotions. It wasn't a test, nor was it a trap. He was seriously asking her this question. "If I say yes, what will you do?" Gu Xingyin raised her eyebrows and asked. End of chapter 10. Gao Lingji was forced to go to sleep. Good night, everyone. Remember to vote for me before you go to sleep. Chapter 995. Then I'll give it to you. Her gaze trembled when she heard those words. Her casual expression turned serious. "Royd, do you know what you're saying?" Royd didn't listen to her. He just said, "You have a high support rate among the people. There won't be any obstacles in this aspect. As for my soldiers, I can completely restrain them. No one will raise any objections." He was actually seriously analyzing the feasibility of this matter. Gu Xingyin laughed. I'm just joking, Royd. Royd looked straight at her. As long as it's something you say, I won't treat it as a joke. His gaze was firm. When he looked at Gu Xingyin, his eyes inadvertently revealed a trace of gentleness. Gu Xingyin had a bright smile on her face. She reached out and took Royd's hand. I'll take you to a place. Before Royd could say anything, he found that the scene around him had suddenly changed. He was still in the Goddess of Nature temple in St. Vita Square a second ago, but the next moment, he was in a completely unfamiliar place. This place was very big. Everywhere was bright. The floor was paved with white jade. It was clean and bright, without a single flaw. The walls were inlaid with fist-sized pearls. These pearls emitted a soft light, illuminating everything in this place. Above his head were lifelike murals. The most eye-catching thing was the luxurious and perfect throne at the end of the hall. Royd felt that even the most magnificent palace he had ever seen in his life couldn't compare to this place. Moreover, this place gave him a familiar feeling. It was as if he had seen it somewhere before. Where had he seen it before? He pondered carefully. Suddenly, his gaze froze. In the records of the Goddess of Nature, there were some descriptions of the Goddess of Nature's temple. He used to think that it was a human's imagination of the gods. But now, looking at it again, he found that it was very similar. No matter how calm a person was, when they knew that they might have come to a place where the gods lived in legends, they would feel unrealistic. He turned his head and looked at Gu Xingyin, who had been silent all this time. This is, Gu Xingyin nodded. That's right, this is the shrine of the Goddess of Nature. There were many Goddess of Nature temples in the Roth Empire. But Royd knew that this Goddess of Nature temple wasn't built by humans. He was puzzled. Why did you bring me here? Wait, how did you bring me here? As far as he knew, even the most favored believer of the gods could only obtain the qualification to enter the divine realm after death. How could Bess bring someone like him, who was not even a believer of the Goddess of Nature, here? Gu Xingyin smiled, I brought you here to tell you something. Her appearance began to change significantly. Her long hair had lengthened, and her appearance and clothes had undergone tremendous changes. Royd looked at the scene in shock until the scepter that symbolized divine authority appeared in the other party's hand. He couldn't help but take a step back. He looked at this familiar yet completely unfamiliar woman in confusion. He could still see a trace of Bess on her face, but it was even more exquisite and perfect than Bess. Although those dark green eyes were still clear, there were too many things in them. This kind of Bess made Royd feel unfamiliar. Chapter 996. You. He opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. This development caught him off guard. The lover he was familiar with had completely changed. Everything in front of him told him that the Bess in his heart was just an illusion. The person in front of him, her true identity, combining her appearance and the place he was in, Royd spat out a word with difficulty, Goddess of Nature. He was a little confused. Even though his mind was firm, everything that had just happened was still beyond his expectations. Gu Xingyin sighed slightly, Royd, it's me. The indifferent divinity in her eyes quietly faded away, and the pair of green eyes revealed the gentleness and affection that Royd was familiar with. All of this, what's going on? Royd tried his best to calm himself down and asked. No matter what, he had to find out. Gu Xingyin waved her hand, and the two of them changed places. This was a huge garden, and there were exquisite tables and chairs beside them. Sit down, Royd. I'll tell you slowly, Gu Xingyin said. Royd sat down, and Gu Xingyin picked up the crystal pot on the table for him to drink. The Goddess of Nature personally poured something for him. Royd thought absent-mindedly, not many people have enjoyed this honor, right? Gu Xingyin slowly told him some things. In the end, she said, Royd, you heard it. I didn't come to the human world to lie to you. Royd opened his mouth. He really wanted to ask, then what about the things that happened between us all these years? Bis likes me, but what about the goddess of nature? Looking at her, he didn't ask in the end. Gu Xingyin, however, saw through his thoughts. She took the initiative to reach out and gently placed her hand on Royd's. Then, Royd, are you willing to accept a lover who has changed her identity? Royd looked up at her. Her face had changed a lot. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't even be able to see any resemblance between her and the human world. Only the familiar gentleness in her eyes was the same as before. This was his Bis. This knowledge calmed Royd down. Yes, so what if she was the goddess of nature? She was just his Bis. Of course, my goddess. He turned his hand and held her hand tightly in his embrace. Gu Xingyin smiled. The name Bizi is just my alias in the human world. Lloyd, call me Bizi. Catrice. In the divine language, it symbolized nature and beauty. This was a title unique to the goddess of nature. Even in the era of glory, only the four lords were qualified to call out this name. But now, there was an ordinary human. Ca. Tsuesi. Lloyd called out the name clumsily. Gu Xingyin felt as though she had sensed something. She could clearly feel the passion and love in Royd's heart when he called out her name. The name of a deity had many meanings, especially when it came to the realm of the goddess of nature. Her name could not be said casually. Because she could sense everything. And now, Royd, I can answer your question. Do you still think I want the Roth Empire? Gu Xingyin asked with a smile. Royd only held her hand tighter. Then you can be my empress, Catrice. Chapter 997. The Empire's Grand Duke Royd led his army into the imperial city. Grand Duke Royd became the new emperor. Grand Duke Royd, now His Majesty Royd, went to the St. Vitus Goddess of Nature temple on the first day of his ascension to the throne. In front of all the believers, he proposed to the oracle, Bes, who was in the middle of answering the believers' questions. More importantly, Goddess Bes said yes. The citizens of the Roth Empire thought that the recent news was getting more and more explosive. They accepted the fact that the Roth Empire had a new ruler. After all, the previous emperor was reprimanded by God himself. Moreover, under the previous emperor's orders, the lives of the citizens were very difficult. After working hard for a year, they didn't even have enough food to eat. In their hearts, no matter how bad things were in the future, it couldn't be worse than now. As for what happened after that, the citizens were even more relieved. Being recognized by the goddess meant that the new emperor was also recognized by God. Royd held a grand wedding ceremony for his empress. On the day of the wedding, countless citizens gathered in front of the imperial palace to give their blessings to their emperor and empress. Standing on the high city walls, Royd looked down at the passionate citizens and said helplessly, "Your popularity seems to be much higher than mine." Gu Xingyin looked at him with a smile. "These people are all my believers. What do you think?" Royd replied seriously, "I am also your believer." Yes, ever since he knew that Bes was the goddess of nature, Royd had become the most loyal believer. In terms of faith, no one was more firm than him. With a smile on her face, Gu Xingyin looked up at the sky. In an instant, countless petals fell from the sky and covered the entire St. Vitus city in a rain of petals. This was the goddess of nature's blessing for the newlyweds. Countless believers began to pray. The relationship between His Majesty's Empress was very good. Many of Royd's confidants were worried that the Empress, as the goddess of nature's oracle, had a very high reputation in the Roth Empire. If the Empress had any thoughts of rebellion, it would be a disaster for the Roth Empire. Some even suggested that His Majesty slowly weaken the goddess of nature's faith in the empire. Not only did Royd ignore these comments, he even took the lead and openly declared that he was also the goddess of nature's most loyal believer. The power of God reached its peak in this era. However, the people approved of such an emperor, and the empress had always stood by his side. Emperor Royd had a very high reputation among the people, so much so that any of his decrees did not need the empire to enforce them. The people would naturally follow him. The goddess of nature's faith had reached its peak. This era was called the Glorious Rise by later historians, which meant that the glorious era that had disappeared was slowly awakening. During the Age of Glory, under the influence of the Roth Empire, some countries began to slowly regain their lost faith. A smile appeared on Gu Xingyin's face as he sensed the awakening of the sleeping gods. Their spirits was their soul's awakened gods. These gods would never be forgotten by their people. Chapter 998. Gu Xingyin had stayed in that world for many, many years. It had been so long that even she could not remember it clearly. She had stayed with Lloyd in the human world for decades, and then Lloyd had been accompanying her in the godly realm. Knowing the vicissitudes of life, humans had been moving forward. When the light of the gods could not overcome the cold light of machines, Gu Xingyin felt the faith in her body slowly flowing away, and she knew that another cycle had ended. She let the temple begin to collapse, and fell into a deep sleep with Lloyd. Gu Xingyin opened her eyes in the space once again, and a trace of joy flashed across her eyes. The experience of the goddess of nature in this life had given her a great understanding of the laws of nature. Her hand paused, and the little emerald bird appeared in her palm out of thin air. Then, it blinked its pitch-black eyes and chirped twice at her. It flapped its little wings, and although it was difficult, it still relied on itself to fly. The system exclaimed, "Host, you've made great progress this time." Gu Xingyin smiled slightly, "It can only live for 2 days. I won't be able to see it when I return from the next mission." Although she said that, she was very satisfied in her heart. As for creation, she had already grasped the essence of it. Now, she only lacked enough power. Her understanding of the mysteries was enough, but her own strength was not enough for her to bear the burden of creating a complete life. As for power, system, arrange for me to enter the next mission world. The power she needed was the soul energy that the world gave back to her every time she completed a mission. Where was this? Gu Xingyin felt that her surroundings were foggy, and her soul seemed to be restricted by something. This feeling was very uncomfortable. System, transfer the world's plot. Yes, host. Gu Xingyin had already gotten used to the dizziness that came with the transfer of memories. This kind of feeling could no longer make her frown. She quickly organized the memories of this world in her mind. This was obviously the story of a selfless senior and an ungrateful wretch. The female lead, Shi Lingxi, was originally a powerful cultivator in the tribulation stage 10,000 years ago. She was a famous fairy in the cultivation world. 10,000 years ago, the world of cultivation welcomed a great calamity, which was later called the Age of Chaos. In that great calamity, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth suddenly disappeared rapidly. Those self-cultivators who relied on spiritual energy to cultivate fell in realms one by one. Their youthful faces instantly became haggard, and their long lifespans shortened overnight. Cultivators died in large batches. Even the tribulation stage powerhouses who stood at the top were not spared. At that time, Shi Lingxi felt the spiritual energy in her body rapidly disappearing. She knew that if this continued, she would inevitably end up like the other cultivators and die a miserable death. She gritted her teeth and made a risky decision. He extracted his own soul and injected it into the spiritual artifact, making himself an existence similar to an artifact spirit. If they were lucky, they would be able to escape this calamity and have a chance to make a comeback. If they were unlucky, they would be reduced to ashes. Shi Lingxi did not ask for an afterlife. She only wanted to fight for the last chance of survival. She succeeded. She sealed her own soul in her purple heaven ring. When the spiritual energy disappeared, she fell into a deep sleep, waiting for the next time to wake up. She did not expect that she would wait for 10,000 years. We know that in many Xuanhuan and Shuzhen novels, the main character has a powerful cheat, and the female lead is now that cheat. See you tonight, and while you're at it, I'll ask for your monthly votes. Chapter 999. After the Age of Doom, the ancient cultivation world was almost wiped out. Those precious cultivation methods and ancient cave abodes had all disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until a few thousand years later that the spiritual chi of heaven and earth slowly overflowed again, that cultivation slowly recovered. However, after losing the brilliant geniuses of the antiquity times and the precious legacies of the sects, the cultivation world of today was completely different from that of the antiquity times. In the cultivation world, cultivators were divided into chi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, incarnation, combination, and tribulation transcendence. 7 major realms. In the ancient times, there were countless high-level cultivators. In other words, nascent soul cultivators were everywhere, and golden core cultivators were like dogs. Only those who reached the soul formation stage were qualified to be called high-level cultivators. But now, foundation establishment cultivators were considered the backbone of a sect, golden core cultivators could become sect elders, and nascent soul cultivators were like patriarchs in an ordinary sect. There were very few soul formation cultivators, and the only combination cultivator in the entire cultivation world was the sword sect's grand elder. As for tribulation transcendence, they only existed in legends. Shi Lingxi was picked up by a girl named Jojo. Jojo was the daughter of a Qiao family in Dongyun City. The Qiao family could be considered a famous cultivation family in Dongyun City, but this daughter of the legal wife, Jojo's cultivation aptitude was even worse than that of a concubine's. In a world where martial arts were respected, one could imagine what kind of treatment she would receive with such talent. Ridicule, sarcasm, and disregard. The most likely outcome was that after she grew up, she would be married off to a talented disciple from a side branch by the family to win over people's hearts. Shi Lingxia's purple heaven ring was picked up by Jojo and bound with her blood. Although Shi Lingxi disliked this girl's extremely poor aptitude, she still did her best to teach her cultivation methods and refine spiritual medicine to improve her foundation. She only had one request: after Jojo became strong, she would find several very precious medicinal herbs for her to help her refine her body. What did Jojo say at that time? He swore to the heavens that he would go through water and tread on fire to find what Senior wanted. But what was the result? Jojo became more and more powerful. Her beauty, self-confidence, and reputation as a peerless genius spread throughout the cultivation world. Even a few outstanding young geniuses in the cultivation world prostrated themselves before her. Shi Lingxi didn't care about this kind of thing. When she was in the cultivation world, her reputation as the Jinghong fairy attracted countless admirers. However, Jojo's heart had grown bigger. The more she interacted with the senior in the ring, the more she felt that he was mysterious and powerful. Everything he had now was given to him by her. It was hard to imagine how powerful Senior was when she was at her peak. Wait for such a powerful Senior to regain his strength? By then, who would be able to see Jojo's brilliance? At first, she really wanted to repay this Senior, but later on, her thoughts slowly changed. In the end, she didn't know where she got an ancient cultivation method from. Soul devouring. Devouring other people's souls, one could obtain the other party's soul power, and one's strength would be greatly enhanced. The more powerful the soul devoured, the more benefits the caster could obtain. Jojo shifted her gaze to Shi Lingxi in the ring. Chapter 1000. If such a mysterious and powerful soul could devour her, once such a thought arose, it could not be erased. Unbeknownst to Shi Lingxi, the junior she had treated with all her heart was already plotting against her. When the entire purple heaven ring was thrown into the furnace, Shi Lingxi was still in disbelief. The purple heaven ring had cast a spell on her and she was trapped in it, unable to escape. She was tortured and roasted for 49 days. Her soul energy was weakened to the lowest point, and her spiritual consciousness was destroyed. The purest soul energy was devoured by Jojo. What happened after that was needless to say. Jojo's original constitution had been transformed by Shi Lingxi into a genius who was extremely suitable for cultivation. She also cultivated with the high-grade techniques provided by Shi Lingxi. In a few hundred years, she successfully entered the ranks of the top experts in the cultivation world and stood at the peak. No one knew that an ancient tribulation stage cultivator had once come to this world. According to the original plan, after Shi Lingxi successfully condensed her physical body, she would use her identity as a tribulation stage cultivator to establish a sect and pass down some of the powerful techniques and cultivation methods of the ancient times. The entire cultivation world would be shaken because of this, and the overall strength of the cultivation world would increase greatly. However, everything was ruined by Jojo. Gu Xingyin came back to her senses. She was now under the ancestral hall of the Qiao family's main residence. She had just woken up from a deep sleep. Of course, she had just slept for 10,000 years, and her soul energy was very weak. That was why she felt very uncomfortable under the pressure of the ring. If she did not find someone to form a contract with as soon as possible, her soul origin would be damaged due to her weakness. This was also an important reason why Shi Lingxi was so anxious to form a contract with Jojo. Gu Xingyin calmed down and said to the system, "Draw skills." This was a trap. The skills of the blood clan in the previous world were of little value. There was no possibility of using them at all. Gu Xingyin thought silently. I hope I'll be lucky this time. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining voice actor Itsu Qingzhou's voice-changing skill. Gu Xingyin, not only do I want to say, hee, I also want to throw it in the system's face. She was from a cultivation world, yet she had such a useless skill. This system was actually flashing a black light. The system said, "Host, the system will not take the blame for this. This is a random skill, it has nothing to do with one's character." Gu Xingyin proudly expressed that she did not want to talk to the system today. After complaining for a while, they returned to the main topic. At this time, Jojo was only 12 years old. She was still the young lady who had no sense of existence in the Qiao family. Because she didn't have the talent for cultivation, her father ignored her. Her mother put all her energy on her newly born sister who was tested to have a Xian grade aptitude. Footsteps could be heard approaching the ancestral hall. Gu Xingyin watched calmly. Now that she was affected by her strength, her divine sense could only see within 3 meters of her. The door of the ancestral hall was opened a little, and a thin and weak figure squeezed in. Her face was delicate and pale. The red mole between her eyebrows made her face brighten up. Jojo. Gu Xingyin immediately recognized her. It was mentioned more than once in the original story. Jojo was most proud of the red beauty mole between her eyebrows. Seeing this, Gu Xingyin couldn't help but touch her face. Between Shi Lingxi's eyebrows, there was a cinnabar mole in the same position. Chapter 1001. She watched as Jojo quietly walked in. Then, she looked at the table with longing in her eyes. The table in the ancestral hall was filled with food. Every day, a servant would place the freshest food on the table. Today, there were 2 plates of juicy peaches and a plate of whole chicken. In the middle of the table, there was a pot of spirit wine. Jojo looked at the food on the table and swallowed her saliva. She hadn't eaten this kind of food in a long time. As an unfavored daughter, she was always given the worst food in her small courtyard. Those favored young masters and young misses, even the servants who served them, had better days than her. Although she didn't like Jojo, Gu Xingyin also disapproved of the Qiao family's actions when she saw this scene. The Qiao family was also one of the aristocratic families in Eastern Cloud City. Since they had the ability to waste these good things on the dead every day, why not steal them from the gaps between their fingers and give them to the descendants of those families who were not favored? It was no wonder that Xiao Qiao did not help her family in the slightest after she became successful. Even those clansmen who had bullied and humiliated her in the past were all taken revenge by her extremely cruel methods. Jojo looked longingly at the plate of whole chicken. She didn't dare to eat it. Every day, someone would come to inspect it. Once the roasted chicken was touched, it would be noticed at a glance. She walked in front of the peaches and took one. Then, she cleverly arranged the rest of the peaches in a different way. It still looked like a whole plate. Gu Xingyin watched her wolfing down the food. She secretly praised her for being so smart at such a young age. In the original plot, Jojo appeared here too many times and finally attracted Shi Lingxi's attention. In the end, she decided to appear and form a contract with her. Jojo's fate changed because of Shi Lingxi. But this time, Gu Xingyin didn't plan to give her this good opportunity. She had no interest in raising another ingrate. When Jojo finished eating, Gu Xingyin thought that she would leave. Who knew that she actually knelt down in front of the numerous memorial tablets in the ancestral hall? Only the heavens knew that although this place was built to be very spacious and bright, it was filled with memorial tablets that ordinary people would feel horrified just by looking at it. Jojo was just a 12-year-old girl, but she didn't feel scared at all. As expected, he had been abnormal since he was young. "Ancestors, Qiao Qiao, thank you for the food," Jojo said in a low voice. She began to thank him, and then she began to talk about her troubles. When Gu Xingyin was about to fall asleep listening to her miserable experience, Jojo dropped a bomb. "Those who look down on me and bully me, I, Jojo, swear that one day, I will make them wish they were dead." Gu Xingyin looked at Jojo's young face, revealing a vicious expression that didn't match her age. She suddenly fell silent. See, this was a girl who had been crooked since she was young. Shi Lingxi probably didn't see this scene in the original plot. Otherwise, she wouldn't have formed a contract with Jojo so easily. With this thought, she felt the current strength of her soul and decided to rely on this little girl to get out. When Jojo didn't notice, a small hole suddenly appeared on the hard ground under her. A dark and inconspicuous ring was revealed, and then quietly slipped into her sleeve. Who? Gu Xingyin only felt waves of weakness coming over her. That simple action just now was already too much for her to bear. Chapter 1002. Jojo didn't stay for too long. After a while, the people in charge of guarding the ancestral hall would come in. Gu Xingyin was led out by her. She now planned to go out first, then walk around the streets to find someone pleasing to the eye, who had the best constitution, and cultivate him. As for the worry of raising another ungrateful person, Gu Xingyin said that she was not a saint. Before the contract was signed, both parties must make a soul oath first. She wanted to leave a backup plan. In this day and age, nothing was more reliable than one's own interests. Jojo walked in the huge Qiao family's mansion. Not to mention the masters of the Qiao family, even the servants didn't greet her. Jojo didn't care. She had long been used to this kind of life. It was good to ignore them, but she was afraid that they would vent their anger on her when they were in a bad mood. Gu Xingyin's luck was still not bad. In the blink of an eye, she saw Jojo go out in the afternoon. She hid in Jojo's sleeve, looking at the people around her. Shi Lingxia's memories were still entrenched in her mind. She was still very familiar with the situation of cultivators. Cultivators' aptitudes were divided into 4 ranks: heaven, earth, Xian, and Huang. Of course, there were also those with inferior aptitudes, such as Jojo, who walked like a cripple. She originally thought that she should at least find a child with Earth-grade aptitude to teach. After all, Lingxi had higher standards. According to her, only those with heaven-grade aptitude could be considered barely acceptable. Unfortunately, she overestimated the situation in the cultivation world today. Not to mention Earth-grade aptitude, she followed Jojo outside for almost 2 hours and didn't even see a Xian-grade aptitude. The rare ones were all Huang-grade aptitude. Most of them were like Jojo, whose aptitude didn't even enter Huang-grade. She didn't have much time. Could it be that she also had to find a person with poor aptitude like in the original plot? Although she had a way to improve a person's aptitude, it would take too much time and energy to do so. Moreover, the foundation was still there. In the original plot, Lingxi used a secret technique to raise Jojo's bone structure to heaven grade. However, this kind of raised bone structure was definitely a far cry from a true heaven grade bone structure. It was only in this era, where a heaven rank was rarely seen, that Jojo, a fake heaven rank, had the opportunity to shine. Jojo is out to sell things. She can exchange the little things she got from the Qiao family's old house for some low-quality spirit stones, which are useful for her cultivation. Gu Xingyin's gaze was suddenly attracted by a small figure. It was a small boy. He was very young, about 8 or 9 years old. His face was covered in dust and his clothes were badly worn. Such a child was obviously a stray child in this city. What made Gu Xingyin excited was none other than the fact that she felt an extraordinary bone structure in this boy. Without contact, she couldn't be sure of the specific situation. But who was Lingxi? She was once a strong cultivator in the tribulation stage, someone who was infinitely close to the great Tao. In terms of eyesight, no one in this world could compare with her. This little boy was at least Earth grade. It's him. Gu Xingyin was delighted. Jojo happened to pass by the little boy when she was walking forward. The black ring fell into the little boy's ragged pocket without anyone noticing. Gu Xingyin clearly saw the look of disdain on Jojo's face when she passed by the little boy. Humans were really strange. Even in the Qiao family, she was also the object of disdain. But outside, she couldn't help but show the most annoying look to others. The night was over. Good night, everyone. Chapter 1003. Gu Xingyin followed the little boy all the way forward. She watched the surrounding environment become more and more remote, from the lively market to the quieter civilian residential area, through the dark alley, and finally came to a desolate ruined temple. It was really desolate here. Even the wanderers with some strength would not choose to stay in such a place. Only people like this little boy, who belonged to the lowest level of the wanderers, would stay in such a place. Gu Xingyin felt a little distressed when she looked at him. Earth-grade aptitude, even in ancient times, such aptitude was enough to enter the top big sect and become an inner disciple. And in this backward era of cultivation, with such aptitude, he could definitely enter the best group of people. He could have been the moon surrounded by the stars, but he was buried in this small ruined temple. But fortunately, he met me. Gu Xingyin thought that with an Earth-grade aptitude, she would teach him well, and his future achievements would certainly be good. In the future, she would help her find the materials to reconstruct her body and restore her peak strength. Then, she would not have to worry about not completing the task. It was a little cold at night, and this small ruined temple could not block the howling wind outside at all. Gu Xingyin looked at the little boy's small body curled up in the corner, and took out a fire starter from his arms with trembling hands. There were some branches in front of him, and it seemed that he wanted to make a fire. But the wind was too strong. He tried several times, but every time the flame just jumped up, it was extinguished by the merciless wind. Gu Xingyin looked at his black and bright eyes that were filled with tears due to the thick smoke, but he still persevered in making a fire. She sighed in her heart. She had always liked children, and seeing this situation, her heart was a little tight. As soon as he activated his spiritual energy, the bonfire that couldn't be lit no matter how hard he tried was suddenly lit. A trace of surprise flashed in the little boy's eyes. Once again, he took out something from his arms. It was black and very small. Gu Xingyin took a closer look and found that it was a sweet potato. Looking at the size of the potato that was not full, it should have been thrown away by those small stalls, but it was treasured by this child. The little boy carefully dug out a small hole in the fire and stuffed the sweet potato into it. He had not eaten for a day, and this was the only food he had. For some reason, Gu Xingyin fell silent. "System, can you find his information?" Gu Xingyin asked. The system's white light flashed and gave a negative answer. The original plot did not mention this character, so it is impossible to verify. If an Earth-grade talent was discovered by the cultivation sects of this era, it would definitely be nurtured with great effort. How could it be unknown? The biggest possibility was that in the original plot, this boy's aptitude was never discovered, and he lived a miserable life. The little boy stared at the bonfire intently. This place could bring him warmth, and there would be delicious food later. Suddenly, an old voice rang in his ears, "What's your name?" "Ah." He raised his head in panic and looked around. There was no one around. Then, where did the voice just now come from? He could not help but move closer to the bonfire, thinking of the vivid stories of ghosts he heard outside the tea house during the day. It can't be haunted, right? Gu Xingyin looked at his frightened appearance with amusement. The bonfire in his body was a little too close. If he moved a little closer, his clothes would burn up. Chapter 1004. "I'm not a ghost, I'm a cultivator," she said again. Cultivator? The little boy knew that there were many cultivators in this city. Those adults were all high and mighty figures. Those people were respectfully called immortal masters. What did immortal masters come here for? "Are you willing to be my disciple?" Gu Xingyin asked directly. Disciple? A cultivator wanted to take him as a disciple. The little boy was surprised for a second, but he immediately reacted. I'm just a beggar. There are many powerful young masters and young ladies in this city, how can those good-for-nothings compare to you? Gu Xingyin's tone was indifferent, as if she was saying something that was natural. Compared to your aptitude, those people are just ants. The little boy was a little confused. In his memory, the most people showed to him was disgust and contempt, and the most words they said to him were, "little beggar," and "ugly." No one had ever said that he was better than others. Then, in the future, can I be as powerful as those immortal masters? He tried to look around, hoping to see that mysterious immortal master. Gu Xingyin was amused by his ambition. If you're talking about the cultivators in this city, the most powerful one is at the late stage of foundation establishment. How can my disciple be at this level? In the future, you can turn them into ashes with just a flick of your finger. The little boy was still a little vigilant. He was only 8 years old, but he had already encountered a lot of things. He didn't believe that someone would come to him for free. Gu Xingyin looked at his expression and secretly nodded in her heart. He was vigilant, not bad. Although he didn't want to raise an ingrate like Jojo, he also didn't want to raise an ignorant fool. I can make a vow with you, I'll take you as my disciple, and I'll do my best to pass on your cultivation method. After you succeed, you'll find me the materials to reconstruct my physical body. Neither side can betray the other. If there's a breach of the vow, the heavens will punish you and you won't be able to reincarnate. No matter how much words were spoken, it could never be compared to a vow that was bound by the Tao of heaven. The little boy was smart. He knew that this was most likely a chance to change his life. Even if the other party was lying to him, in his current state, what was there to be deceived by others? Immediately, he knelt down and bowed 3 times to the void. Disciple greets master. This was what he had heard from the storyteller. Gu Xingyin looked at him. If it had been 10,000 years ago, if the Jinghong fairy had said that she wanted to take in a disciple, who knew how many geniuses would have rushed forward to burn incense, bathe, worship the heaven and earth, and drink 3 cups of tea and 6 rites, she didn't expect her first disciple to be accepted so carelessly. Oh well, times are different now. Gu Xingyin accepted his salute. Somehow, she felt that there seemed to be karma that had fallen on her. This meant that the heavenly Tao had acknowledged their relationship. What's your name? She asked for the second time. The little boy hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. I don't have a name. Everyone calls me little beggar. How could a little beggar who couldn't even guarantee food and clothing have the mind to give himself a name? Gu Xingyin thought for a moment. Since you've taken me as your master, I'll give you a name. According to the seniority of my disciples, you should be from the Yan generation. You'll be called Yan Sui. Are you willing to take my surname? The little boy's eyes lit up. I'm willing. Good, then you'll be called Gu Yan Sui. Chapter 1005. That night, Gu Xingyin and Gu Yansui talked a lot. Gu Yansui knew that his master was a very powerful immortal master who had lost his physical body in an accident and was trapped in the purple firmament ring. Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, had gained a deeper understanding of her little disciple. He did not know who his parents were, and from the earliest memories, he had lived with an old beggar. That old beggar had not been very good to him, and he had probably kept him as a pet to relieve his loneliness. Even so, the old beggar had been his only family member. His only family member had passed away last winter. Gu Xingyin thought that compared to her own disciple, the treatment that Jojo had suffered in the Qiao family was nothing. After all, the Qiao family still had to keep up appearances, and they would not shortchange their family members. Looking at Gu Yansui's dirty and black clothes, Gu Xingyin sighed. Put your hand into your pocket. Gu Yansui did as he was told and touched something hard. It was a black ring. Gu Yansui asked curiously, "This is the purple firmament ring that master mentioned?" With such a powerful name, he had thought that it would be something good. It did not look like much at all. A young child's thoughts were written all over his face. Gu Xingyin said, "Bite your middle finger and drip a drop of blood on it." She was now considered a ring spirit, and dripping a drop of blood on the ring was just a ritual. The key was to gain her recognition as a ring spirit. Gu Yansui did as he was told. The dark red blood dripped onto the black ring, and the originally unremarkable ring instantly changed. It was as if something had wiped away the outer layer of darkness and revealed the inner layer of light. The true appearance of the purple heaven ring was also revealed. It was a spiritual weapon refined from an extremely rare 1,000-year-old purple jade. Complex runes were engraved on it, and it looked very delicate. The whole ring shone in the darkness. Gu Yansui stared at the ring in his hand that had changed greatly, and then looked at his dirty hands. He suddenly felt that he was not worthy to hold it. Gu Xingyin felt a new power being transmitted into his soul, and the feeling of weakness that he had felt earlier instantly disappeared. This was the benefit of forming a contract. She moved her consciousness, and a large pile of things appeared on the ground of the rundown temple. That little bottle on the left. Pick it up. There are white elixirs in it. Take one and it will make you go hungry for 10 days. Fortunately, these things were sealed in the purple firmament ring. If they were outside, they would have all been destroyed in 10,000 years. Gu Yansui reached out and was about to take it when he suddenly paused. He put the ring on the ground and ran to the back of the rundown temple. Gu Xingyin's consciousness could now extend up to 5 meters, and she could see clearly that he was washing his hands. When he came out again, Gu Yansui's hands had been washed clean, and he washed his face as well. Gu Xingyin looked at the child with red lips and white teeth in amazement. It was hard to imagine that this was the little beggar from earlier. Gu Yensui smiled embarrassedly and said, "My face was painted like that on purpose. Old Chang told me that if I don't want to be sold by bad people, I have to do that." Old Chang was the old beggar who had raised Gu Yensui. Gu Xingyin looked at his exquisite face and understood what the old beggar had said. In this world, men and women who were beautiful but did not have the ability to protect themselves all ended up in a miserable state. Chapter 1006. It's a pity I don't have any clothes you can wear. Tomorrow, take this spirit stone to the pawn shop and exchange it for some money you can use here. Jinghong Fairy's purple heaven ring naturally wouldn't have anything bad. After rummaging for a long time, she finally found a few mid-grade spirit stones among the countless high-grade spirit stones. Mid-grade spirit stones were extremely hard to come by in Eastern Cloud City. The next day, Jin Yuzhai, the largest pawn shop in Eastern Cloud City, had a guest who didn't fit in. As the largest pawn shop in Eastern Cloud City, Jin Yuzhai's customers were all rich and respectable. But today, a little beggar in ragged clothes came. But speaking of which, although this little beggar's clothes weren't very good and were old and tattered, his body was very clean and his appearance was extremely rare. To be able to work here as a clerk, the clerk wasn't stupid. He didn't look down on Gu Yensui just because of his appearance. "This little young master, why have you come here?" he asked carefully. It was Gu Yensui's first time entering a place like this, so he was actually a bit scared. But he firmly remembered his master's words to him, "You are my disciple. In terms of status, no one in this world is more noble than you. You don't need to fear anyone." He raised his head and said crisply, "I'm here to pawn something." He was very handsome. When he raised his head like this, he really did look a bit like a young master from an aristocratic family. Even the trace of nervousness in his eyes was interpreted by the clerk as him being afraid to go out alone. After all, he was still so young. "What does little young master want to pawn?" the clerk asked with a smile. Gu Yensui glanced at him. According to what Gu Xingyin taught him, you can't make the decision, find someone who can. The clerk was shocked when he heard this. He was even more certain that this little young master wasn't an ordinary person. But his appearance, Gu Yensui's little face stiffened. "What? Is this how Jin Yuzhai treats its customers?" The waiter's expression changed. He smiled and said, "Young master, please don't be angry. Please take a seat and rest for a while. I will call the steward." He left in a hurry. Soon, a smart-looking middle-aged man with a mustache followed him in. The middle-aged man had obviously heard about what had happened from the waiter. The moment he saw Gu Yensui, he began to greet him. "I heard that young master wants to pawn something in our humble abode." He secretly sized up Gu Yensui. But looking at his appearance, he really didn't look like he was raised by an ordinary family. Putting aside his dressing, his hands didn't look like they belonged to a pampered young master of an aristocratic family. Could it be a lie? At this moment, the steward suddenly felt an immense pressure crushing down on him. Cold sweat instantly dripped down his back. At the same time, an old female voice sounded coldly in his mind, "Is the young master of our family someone you can casually size up?" The steward hurriedly shifted his gaze away and raised his hands to apologize. "Senior, please forgive me." This junior just couldn't help but take a few more glances at the young master's unique physique. It was only then that the pressure moved away. The steward was drenched in cold sweat. He was a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. In Dongyun City, he could be considered a high-level expert. But the voice just now was able to suppress him with just pressure. It was obvious that this person was at least a great realm higher than him. A middle-stage golden core cultivator as a guard. What exactly was the background of this little young master? Gao Lingji said, "His background is very big. He's the disciple of a tribulation-passing stage ancestor. If I tell you, you'll be scared to death." If you don't give me the ticket, I'll release the female lead and scare N.I. Meng to death. Humph. Chapter 1007. A smile quickly appeared on the manager's face, and he said to Gu Yensui in a gentle tone, I wonder what young master wants to sell in my Jin Yuzhai. A brocade pouch appeared in Gu Yensui's hand, and he casually tossed it to the manager. The manager's eyes narrowed. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that the brocade pouch had appeared in the young master's hand out of thin air. In other words, this young master had at least one storage spirit tool in his hand. A storage spiritual artifact was definitely something that could only be found by chance. The steward's opinion of Gu Yensui rose to another level in his heart. Gu Yensui said with a serious face, open it and see. The manager hurriedly opened the pouch in his hand. Gu Xingyin looked at Gu Yensui's appearance and wanted to laugh. He had delicate features, and with such a serious face, he didn't give people the slightest impression of dignity. Instead, he looked very cute. She had picked up a cute treasure. Gu Xingyin thought to herself. The manager opened the pouch in his hand, and his entire body froze for a moment. Inside this brocade pouch, there was actually a dense array of glowing mid-grade spirit stones. Sensing the spiritual power overflowing from them, he found that these were mid-grade spirit stones of the highest quality, only a little bit away from second-rate high-grade spirit stones. Mid-grade spirit stones, ah. In Eastern Cloud City, the currency used between cultivators was basically spirit beads. Only the young masters and young ladies of those large aristocratic families would use spirit stones. Of course, the most they could possess were low-grade spirit stones. He had never heard of anyone in Eastern Cloud City who could casually toss out so many high-quality mid-grade spirit stones. This young master couldn't have come from some other large city, right? As if confirming his guess, the young master in front of him seemed to grumble with some dissatisfaction. After coming to this place, I don't even have a place to spend my money, apart from those large sects, who would use mid-grade spirit stones as currency. The manager took a deep breath and said with a smile, there are 49 mid-grade spirit stones here. Does young master want to pawn them all? What do you want in exchange? Gu Yensui rolled his eyes and said, first, find 2 sets of clothes that I can wear. Remember, don't bring me the ones that are too bad. As for the rest, I'll take a look myself. The steward nodded his head repeatedly. In his heart, he was also bewildered. With the protection of such an expert, he did not know how this young master had fallen to such a state. He thought for a while, but still couldn't figure it out. He shook his head and ordered the assistant beside him to bring a few sets of clothes over. How could Gu Yensui recognize these things? To him, everything that he had experienced today was like a dream. He entered Jin Yuzhai, a place he never dared to dream of. The shop assistants and stewards, who were usually arrogant, welcomed him with smiles. All of this was given to me by master. He silently thought as he grew more and more curious about the master he had never met. The steward followed beside him. Seeing that this young master's expression did not even change as he looked at the top-grade spirit tools, he was even more certain that the other must have seen many good things on a daily basis. That was why he was so calm. However, he was thinking too much. Gu Yensui was so calm only because he did not know what these things were or how much they were worth. Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, completely despised these things. Chapter 1008. What the hell are these things? Her brows furrowed deeply. How could these crudely made things have the nerve to call them spiritual tools? Gu Xingyin looked at them for a while and couldn't stand it anymore. She said to Gu Yensui, let's go look at the spiritual herbs. Hearing Gu Yensui's request, the steward was shocked. Could it be that this young master didn't like any of them? He didn't show it on his face and only led Gu Yensui to look at the spiritual herbs. Shi Lingxi was a strong cultivator in the crossing calamity stage. Even if she wasn't an alchemist, her level of refining medicine was much higher than that of ordinary mid-level alchemists. Now, she had to lay a good foundation for Gu Yensui's body. Gu Yensui had never cultivated before, so she could only start from the lowest level of cultivation medicine. As for medicinal herbs, there were no low-level things in the Jinghong Fairy's purple heaven ring. Fortunately, there were all kinds of low-level medicinal herbs here. The steward followed them and watched this young master walk while pointing at the spiritual herbs one by one for him to pack. The more he looked, the more shocked he was. It seemed that he was going to refine medicine. But among these medicinal herbs, there were low-level and high-level ones. He had never heard that refining that kind of medicine required these kinds of spiritual herbs. Give me 20 sets of all of these. Gu Yensui pointed at the things he had just chosen. Just deduct it from the spirit stones I just took out. While they were talking, the shop assistant had already brought the clothes over. At this moment, the steward also felt that this young master's ragged clothes were really unsightly, so he suggested that he change clothes first. The shop assistant held the clothes and brought Gu Yensui to the cloakroom. But after the shop assistant left, Gu Yensui stood there for a long time without moving. Gu Xingyin was about to ask when she heard the child's shy words. Master, later, can you not look? Gu Xingyin couldn't help but laugh. Was she shy? She probed with her divine sense. Sure enough, the child's fair face was flushed red, and his hands were tightly clasped together. She laughed. Okay. I won't look. You're a boy. Why are you so shy? Gu Yensui pursed his lips and began to change his clothes after receiving his master's reply. However, after a while, Gu Xingyin heard her little disciple calling out to her again. Master? Gu Xingyin didn't look at him and only asked, what's wrong? Gu Yensui sounded like he was about to cry. I won't. Gu Xingyin, she could only look over. As it turned out, the clothes that the shop assistant had prepared were all standard for aristocratic family members. Gu Yensui couldn't make all those complicated clothes, underwear, robes, belts, and so on by himself. Although Gu Xingyin knew how to put them on, she didn't have a body now. She could only say it verbally and couldn't help much. Thus, the shop assistant waiting outside received a summons from the young master inside. Come here, help me put on my clothes. A muffled voice came from inside. The shop assistant didn't seem to be surprised. He went in and saw Gu Yensui standing there alone with his clothes in his arms. His face seemed to be a little red. He chuckled as he helped Gu Yensui put on his clothes one by one. He sighed in his heart, he is indeed the son of an aristocratic family. This young master must have been served since he was young. He doesn't even know how to wear clothes. What a beautiful misunderstanding. Chapter 1009. Gu Yensui tried his best to follow what Gu Xingyin taught him. He kept a straight face and put on a proud expression. His bag of middle-grade spirit stones was not only used to exchange for a lot of elixirs and 2 sets of clothes, but also a lot of low-grade spirit stones and spirit beads for his daily expenses. When it was time to leave, the steward personally sent him out of the door very attentively. When Gu Yensui came out of the golden fish algae again, no one could associate him with the ragged little beggar from before. When others saw him, they would only feel strange. Which family would let such a young master come out by himself? When they walked to the side of the road, Gu Xingyin asked him, "Are you hungry?" Gu Yensui shook his head. He ate a pill given to him by his master, so he didn't feel hungry at all. Gu Xingyin was someone who had raised a child. She thought of Alan Eyre, the child that she had raised single-handedly. The two of them were both raised by her, but their circumstances were completely different. Alan Eyre was born with the blessings of all the elves and was liked by everyone. When he was with her, he would act spoiled and directly say what he wanted. He was completely a child who grew up in a jar of honey. But Gu Yensui was different. The first 8 years of his life had left a deep mark on his life. In the past, when he wanted something, he didn't have the ability to have it. Now that he could have it, he was used to suppressing his desires. For example, just now, Gu Xingyin saw very clearly that he swallowed his saliva when he looked at the vendor selling sugar figurines on the side of the road. Perhaps, for a long time in his life, eating cheap and inferior sugar figurines was an extravagant hope. Yen Sui. Gu Xingyin didn't even realize how gentle her voice was. Master? Gu Yensui obediently shouted. Do you want to eat sugar figurines? She asked. Gu Yensui hesitated for a moment. Gu Xingyin encouraged him, if you want to eat, say it out loud and go buy it. Gu Yensui looked up at the vendor again and nodded. Yes. Gu Xingyin felt a little sour in her heart. She said, if you want to eat, then take the money and buy one. Remember, Yen Sui, you are now my disciple. No matter what you want to do, as long as it's not something outrageous, you can do it. Master is here. Gu Yensui's eyes were a little red. He didn't say anything and just ran to the vendor to buy a candy figurine. He still remembered that he had passed by this place countless times and saw other children happily buying food under the guidance of adults. At that time, the old beggar was still alive. It was rare for him to tell him that he wanted to eat the candy man. But how did the old beggar answer, I don't even have food to eat, and you still want to eat candy? If you have the money, you might as well buy a steamed bun. Since then, he had never said what he wanted. Because he knew that he couldn't afford it. But now, he had his master. Although his master couldn't hold his hand like other parents, she was always by his side. He put the candy figurine in his mouth. The sweet taste spread from the tip of his tongue to his heart. It didn't taste very good, and it was even a little too sweet. But Gu Yensui felt that he had never eaten something so delicious in his life. Master. He called out softly. Gu Xingyin didn't hear him clearly. Gu Yensui didn't say anything else and just licked the candy figurine in his hand. Thank you, master. Chapter 10:10. Damn little bastard, how dare you steal my things? I'll beat you to death. A middle-aged man was beating a little beggar in front of him. The little beggar was like a weak little chick under the middle-aged man's hands. He had no room to resist at all. There were many people watching the scene, but no one spoke up to help the little beggar. Many people were even jeering. Teacher. Gu Yensui looked there seriously and suddenly opened his mouth. What's wrong? Gu Yensui was obviously a little confused. I know this person. He used to bully me. He stole my food and made me hungry for 2 days. Gu Xingyin didn't understand what he meant and asked, so? Did he want to take revenge? Gu Yensui frowned his beautiful eyebrows, but when I look at him, I feel that he is very pitiful. He stole because he was so hungry that he couldn't take it anymore. That burly man didn't suffer much loss. Gu Xingyin heard this and understood what he meant. She didn't expect that Gu Yensui, who grew up in such an environment, would have a pure heart that was not polluted. Gu Yensui asked her at this time, Teacher, do you think I should go out and stop that strong man now? Gu Xingyin gave him the choice. Yen Sui, I said that you only need to think about what you want to do. For example, at this moment, if you want to help that child, go. If you don't want to, don't go. It's good that you think about it clearly. Gu Yensui seemed to have never made such a big decision by himself. The little beggar's voice in front of him was getting louder and louder. Gu Yensui finally made up his mind. He almost ran in front of the strong man and shouted, Stop fighting. When the strong man heard someone stop him, he was a little unhappy and turned his head with a fierce face. But when he saw Gu Yensui dressed like a rich young master, his momentum couldn't help but weaken. He was just a commoner. He couldn't afford to offend such a young master. However, he wasn't willing to let the thief off just like that. The big man said in a muffled voice, "Little young master, you don't know. This little beggar always steals from my family, it's obviously my first time stealing." The little beggar under him couldn't help but shout. "Little brat, you still dare to quibble." The large man glared and was about to attack again. Gu Yensui couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a few spirit beads from his sleeve and handed them to the big man. "Okay, stop fighting. This is to compensate for your loss." He had an impatient look on his face. The burly man couldn't figure out his identity. Seeing how generous he was, he weighed his options and put down the person in his hand. "Brat, you're lucky today. Since you've met a benefactor, I'll let you off," he said viciously to the little beggar before turning around and leaving. Seeing that the matter was settled, Gu Yensui turned around and left. The little beggar behind him chased after him. "Benefactor." He stopped Gu Yensui and rolled his shrewd eyes. "Benefactor saved my life. I want to repay my benefactor." Gu Yensui frowned. "I don't need you to repay me. I just happened to see it today." The little beggar was a little unwilling to forgive him. He looked at the young master who was dressed in rich clothes and was very kind. He thought that if he could follow him, at least he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothes in the future. "Send it to me at 8 o'clock. I don't have it today. I'll see if I can write more tonight and put some up in the early morning. Today is the 5th. There are 2 days left for the double monthly ticket. If you have a monthly ticket, don't forget to vote for Jijiang. Also, don't stop voting for the recommendation tickets." Chapter 10-11. Gu Xingyin didn't say anything. She quietly looked at Gu Yensui, wanting to see how he would deal with this kind of thing. Gu Yensui refused several times, but the little beggar seemed to be determined and wanted to rely on him. But Gu Yensui was not a naive young master raised by a rich family. He roughly knew why the little beggar wanted to follow him. It was nothing more than wanting to rely on him for a future without worrying about food and clothing. But he had his master's purple heaven ring in his hand. This kind of secret, he couldn't let anyone get close to him. What's more, the little beggar didn't look like a well-behaved person. Seeing the little beggar blocking his way and not allowing him to leave, Gu Yensui's expression completely turned cold. "I can save you from the big man, so naturally I can let you return to that situation." The little beggar was stunned. He thought this young master was kind-hearted. He pretended to be pitiful and begged, and most likely he could succeed. He didn't expect this person to be so cold-hearted. Gu Yensui glanced at him, "Don't follow me anymore." Then, she walked over his body and walked past him. The little beggar didn't dare to stop him this time. He watched Gu Yensui leave. He understood that the person who saved him was different from those young masters. Gu Yensui walked forward until he couldn't see the little beggar. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. The forced indifference on his face was also removed. "Why didn't you let the little beggar follow you just now?" Gu Xingyin asked. Gu Yensui was a little confused. He thought Gu Xingyin was blaming him for being too cruel. "Master, do you think I did something wrong?" He seemed to be a little helpless. Gu Xingyin sighed. She had already found that although Gu Yensui could pretend to be an arrogant young master, he was still very insecure and even a little inferior. Especially when facing her, his attitude was always so careful that it made her heart ache. She tried her best to soften her voice. "Yensui, have you forgotten what Master said? Master said that you should be responsible for your own decisions. Master just wants to ask you, why did you reject that little beggar?" When Gu Yensui heard that his master had no intention of blaming him, he felt relieved. His mind was very clear to begin with. Now that he had calmed down and thought about it, he roughly understood that his master had the intention of testing him. He organized his thoughts and said slowly, "First, I have the secret of the purple cloud ring in the existence of my master, so it's not suitable for anyone to know. Second, I don't think this person is very honest. He wants to follow me not because he wants to repay my kindness, but because he wants something else. Third." When he said this, he paused. Gu Xingyin was listening. Hearing him suddenly stop, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's wrong with the third one?" Gu Yensui felt that it was best not to let his master know what he was going to say next, but he did not want to lie to his master. Thus, he answered honestly, "Disciple actually has selfish motives. I don't want master to take a fancy to other children." This was his selfish motive. Today's days were too good. He was not willing to see his master like other children. He was not willing to see his master take a fancy to other children. A person who had never eaten candy might not have any extravagant hopes. But for a person who had eaten the most fragrant honey in the world, if he were to eat coarse sugar again, it would become a torture. Chapter 10-12. Gu Xingyin did not expect to hear such words from her little disciple. She was silent for a moment. She looked at Gu Yensui's lowered head, as if he was ready to accept her punishment at any time. Finally, she sighed. A child like this, it was really hard to be cruel to him. "Yensui, don't worry. Master will not accept any other disciples. You are the most special one." She accepted this disciple under the influence of various factors. Teaching one disciple was enough to exhaust her mental and physical strength. Gu Xingyin expressed that she did not have so much time to raise another child. Gu Yensui's little face showed a happy smile because of her words. "All right, don't be happy so quickly. Let's find a place to settle down first." Gu Xingyin interrupted his silly smile. The two of them rented a courtyard in eastern Cloud City. In addition, Gu Xingyin also let Gu Yensui go to the market to buy 3 slaves. 2 of them were big and strong men, and a healthy middle-aged woman, who would be responsible for his daily life. The 3 of them had bought an irrevocable contract, which meant that after Gu Yensui bought them, all 3 of their lives would belong to him. But Gu Xingyin was not at ease with such a death contract. It was just a contract. If those people had any bad intentions, although she was confident that the other party would not be able to hurt them, it was better to be safe than sorry, right? So, on the first day of bringing the 3 of them back, Gu Xingyin once again pretended to be the mysterious guard of the young master and gave the 3 of them a fierce warning. Not only that, she also forced the 3 of them to swear a master and servant oath. In the future, if any of them had any thoughts of rebellion, the contract would immediately take effect and that person would die without a burial place. The method of a master has always been to give a carrot after a stick. Gu Xingyin was well versed in this. After the 3 of them made the oath, they received 3 low-level cultivation techniques from her. It was just a simple body forging technique. Even if one did not have the talent for cultivation, they could still practice it to strengthen their body. However, very few people were able to advance through it. In ancient times, this cultivation method was like a textbook, and everyone could learn it. But now, it was considered a lost antique. In the current cultivation world, any cultivation technique, even if it was a low-level one, was regarded as a treasure, let alone this one. At that time, the 3 of them acted as if they had received a precious treasure. They knelt down and kowtowed to Gu Yensui, without the slightest resentment of being forced to swear an oath. Gu Xingyin was generous and bought a large courtyard. Gu Yensui lived in the innermost inner courtyard, the cook lived in the east wing, and the 2 strong men lived in the outer courtyard. Gu Yensui had already made it clear that they were not allowed to enter the inner courtyard on normal days. The kitchen maids would prepare food and send it to him every day. As for the two guards, they would just watch the door when they had nothing to do. It was very easy. When the three of them were bought, they were very nervous. They did not expect the new owner to be so easy to talk to. For a moment, they were grateful to Gu Yensui. They were loyal to him. In the inner courtyard, Gu Shengyin began the process of transforming Gu Yensui's bone structure. In the cultivation world, children before the age of 10 were the best time to build a foundation. Those children from the big sects, who had good conditions, even when they were in their mother's womb, would be infused with Xiantian True Qi every day to build up the bone structure of the fetus. After the fetus was born, it would be supplemented with elixirs internally and medicinal baths externally to strengthen the body, firmly building the foundation of the body. Gu Yensui's starting point was much worse than others. But it did not matter. He had a master who was in the tribulation stage, the only one in the cultivation world. Gu Shengyin was sure that in the original plot, Shi Lingxi would not be as attentive to Jojo as she was to Gu Yensui. She was Gu Shengyin's disciple. Of course, she would not be worse than anyone else. Therefore, this was a world of masters. It had been a long time since she last updated at midnight. Although it was only 2 short chapters. Gao Lingji would continue to write diligently and strive to be a diligent person who would update at midnight as soon as possible. Chapter 10-13. Gu Shengyin had to admit that some people were born to walk this path. The medicinal decoction that she made for Gu Yensui had the best effect for him at this stage and could maximize his potential. In the original plot, Shi Lingxi also made a medicinal decoction for Jojo, but it was a gentler one. There was only one reason: although this medicinal decoction was very effective, its medicinal properties were also the strongest. This also meant that when the body was soaked in it, the pain would be the most intense. Gu Shengyin had reminded Gu Yensui more than once that if he could not bear it, he must tell her. However, when Gu Yensui was soaked in the medicinal decoction for the first time, even though his face was pale and bloodless from the pain and he even fainted, he did not tell her that it was no good. Gu Yensui knew in his heart that since his master said that this was the most effective decoction, she must not have lied to him. His master was so good to him, so of course he had to do his best and not let her down. Gu Shengyin saw his persistence. She was somewhat gratified. With such an excellent aptitude in a child who could endure hardship, coupled with her guidance, there was almost no suspense about his future. She had also been paying attention to Jojo's side, and there had been no accidents. Now, the only thing that she was not sure about was her lover. She had once suspected that Gu Yensui would be her lover in this world. According to the general development of the plot, even her own feelings for this child made her feel that it should be Gu Yensui. However, he did not have the lotus fragrance that Gu Shengyin was able to confirm in the end. Perhaps, the lover in this world was someone else. Or could it be that Gu Yensui's body had something happened to him? Gu Shengyin could not get an accurate answer. She could only shake her head. She was now only left with a little spirit and was still trapped in this purple heaven ring. Her strength had been greatly reduced, and it was not convenient for her to do anything. Perhaps, he would only be able to find him after he reconstructed his physical body. She glanced at Gu Yensui. Regardless of whether this child was him or not, he was still a disciple that she acknowledged in her heart. She would teach him with all her heart until he shone brightly in this world. This time, Gu Yensui soaked in the medicinal soup for half a year. In the beginning, Gu Yensui was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Now, he could soak in the bathtub for an hour without any change in his expression. In this half a year, Gu Shengyin did not teach him any cultivation techniques or techniques. She had told Gu Yensui directly, "Your body is too weak. The strength of your bones will determine how far you can go in the future. Only when you have a solid foundation will you have a chance to reach that supreme realm in the future." In fact, Gu Yensui didn't really understand these things. He only knew one thing, and that was that his master would never lie to him, nor would he harm him. If Gu Xingyin knew this child's thoughts, she would probably not know whether to laugh or cry. He relied on her too much. Half a year of medicinal bathing had changed Gu Yensui greatly. His skin was originally very white. Under the training of the medicinal bath, the layer of dead skin on his skin had completely shed off, and the new skin was even fairer and softer. His temperament had also undergone a huge change. If it was said that there was a trace of timidity and inferiority that came from his bones before, then now, he had truly become a noble young master that had been nurtured by the warmth of gold and jade. Gu Yensui spread out his hands and looked at his palms. There were originally some calluses that had been brought about by his poor life, but now, they were completely clean. Anyone who saw them would think that these were a pair of hands that had lived like a prince. Only he himself knew what kind of strength was contained in these seemingly weak and powerless hands. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.